What if the girl on the tired horse reaches the twins before the music turns? What if the road is a little drier, the delay in the woods a little shorter, and the river keep rises ahead of her, not as a tomb she does not yet understand, but as a fortress still full of laughter and living Starks? The horse's flanks are dark with sweat and rain, its hooves sucking at the mud of the river road with a slow, exhausted rhythm. Dusk presses in, a soft, encroaching darkness that blurs the line between sky and water, and ahead the twins loom. 2 squat towers, joined by stone and shadow, their windows pricked with fire. The air is thick with the smell of river mud and roasting meat, a heavy, greasy promise that makes Arya's empty stomach twist. She rides closer. Torches gutter along the walls, their flames bowing and straightening in the damp wind, the way a man bows too quickly to a lord he does not respect. Above them, banners hang side by side, the pale blue of House Frey, the grey direwolf of Stark, sharing the same wet air, as if this were simple, as if the world had not already taught her the cost of trusting such signs. Inside the stone, somewhere beyond the gate and the bridge and the guarded doors, there is a feast. She can hear it now, faintly, carried on the river wind, a muffled drumbeat, the rise and fall of pipes, the distant surge of many voices in one room. It sounds almost like safety. It sounds almost like home. She does not let herself believe it. Hunger gnaws at her, dull and constant. But there is another ache beneath it, older and sharper, the ache of almost home. She rides, and in her head she rehearses their faces the way important words are rehearsed before they are spoken aloud. Rob's smile, quick and rare. Her mother's eyes, tired but steady. Grey Wind's jaws closing on a man's throat. She moves from one to the next so she will not forget, so the road cannot take them from her a second time. The guards at the gate see only a small, ragged figure on a worn horse, a nameless girl with mud on her boots and a sword too fine for her hip. They shift, uneasy in the damp, hands on spears, eyes flicking to the bridge, the towers, the hall beyond. There is a stillness in them that is not quite boredom, not quite fear. It is the tight, watchful quiet of men standing in a room where someone has already decided on treachery. Arya feels it without knowing the word for it. A prickle along her neck. A wrongness in the way the drums do not quite match the laughter, in the way the firelight at the window seems too bright against the winter-dark sky. Some animal part of her, the part that has slept in ditches and listened for men in the trees, wants to turn the horse and vanish back into the night. She does not. The gate creaks open on old hinges. A Frey man, face slack with disdain, waves her through with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, only so he can break it later. She rides beneath the stone arch, crosses the threshold where guest right should be a shield stronger than any steel, and the camera lingers on her thin, intent face as she passes into a castle that has already chosen its shadowed cost, and a betrayal she cannot yet name. On the Cannon Road, it is almost cruel how close she comes. The sky is already bruising toward evening when Sandor turns his horse toward the slower, safer track, the one that hugs the tree line and keeps them out of sight of Frey patrols. The ground is thick with old rain. Hoofprints turn to shallow pools, and every step is a small argument between speed and not breaking a leg. He does not say he is tired. He does not say he is calculating. He only grunts, reins shifting, and the choice is made. There are delays that do not feel like delays while they are happening. A farmer's cart stuck in the mud. A brief, ugly scuffle over a stolen chicken. A moment where Arya's stubborn, exhausted body simply refuses to swing into the saddle without stopping to drink. Each one is nothing, taken alone. Together, they are the thin band of time that separates a living brother from a dead one. So in the story we know, she reaches the twins under a sky already loud with false celebration. She hears the music first, the bright tumbling notes that are supposed to mean safety and bread and salt. Then she hears the shift, the way important words go quiet in a hall just before the knives are drawn. She smells smoke. She smells blood. She sees a wolf's head where a king's should be, and Sandor's rough hand comes down like a curtain, dragging her back into the darkness before she can step fully into that room. What if that curtain falls an hour earlier? What if the single decision that seemed so small becomes the hinge upon which everything else turns? In this path, the sky is clearer. The last storm breaks a day sooner, and the road dries in long, cracked veins instead of sucking at their horses' legs. Sandor's mount is not the plodding, half-lame creature he wins in a bad wager, but a broad-chested gelding with good lungs and better feet, taken off a dead man on the King's Road weeks before. When the track splits, one way down into the safer valley, one way across a stony ford where the river runs fast and black, he looks once at the clouds, once at the girl. "Fray men down there," he mutters. "I'm not in the mood." It is not prophecy, it is impatience. It is the way a man who has lived too long in other men's wars grows sick of banners and questions. Arya's legs are shaking, her hands are blistered. She insists they go on. She does not want to sleep in a ditch when her mother is across the water. The argument is short, bitter, and unremarkable. They take the ford, the horses stumble, but they do not fall. An hour is shaved away, washed downstream with the mud and the curses. No one in the story speaks of it. There is no raven, no omen, no fire in the sky. Just petty temper, tired feet, and the quiet arithmetic of distance. Yet that hour will ask its own questions. It will test guest right and loyalty, and the cost of vengeance. It will press Arya harder against the edge between the child who chased cats in Winterfell's courtyards and the weapon she is learning to be, the way winter presses against a thin door. By the time the twins rise before them, stone bridges over black water, their towers are not yet echoing with screams. Banners snap in a cold wind. Torches burn steadily along the walls. Everything is poised, waiting. The castle sits like a hinge between river and north, between feast and slaughter, and Arya's next step forward is a choice that will tilt more than her own small life into a different shadow. She feels it, without understanding, the sense that the whole world has drawn in a breath and has not yet decided how to let it go. She takes that next step because there is nothing else to do. The bridge rises ahead of her, stone arching over black water, and the twins loom on either side, like two watching faces that have agreed for the moment not to speak. Arya swings her leg down from the saddle, boots hitting the ground harder than she intends. Sandor is beside her in an instant. His hand closes, just for a breath, around her arm. Not gentle, not cruel. The way a man steadies a skittish horse without admitting he is doing it. She does not pull away. Not yet. The Frey guards at the gate look them over with the lazy suspicion of men who have already decided what matters tonight. Their eyes slide past Sandor's burned face, catch on his sword, then drift to Arya's torn cloak, the road dust ground into her hem, the way her hair hangs in rough knots. One of them snorts, a faint curl of contempt that says she is beneath notice, too small and ragged to carry any important word into this room of banners and oaths. They wave them through. The stones of the bridge are slick under Arya's boots, a thin sheen of damp that makes each step feel like a question. The river below mutters to itself in the darkness, unseen but always there, a running shadow beneath all of this noise. From the nearest hall comes the smell of spiced wine and heavy, fatty meat, the kind that leaves grease on fingers and lips. Laughter rolls out in uneven bursts, loud and then oddly thin, as if it has to fight its way through something thicker than smoke. Bread and salt, she thinks, the words bobbing up from somewhere soft and far away. Her mother's voice, Ned's quieter one beneath it. Guessed right. You share a man's table, you break his bread, you taste his salt, and you are safe beneath his roof. Some laws are older than kings, Arya, older than keeps and crowns. He speaks of them the way important words are always spoken in Winterfell. as if they are not rules you choose but whether you endure. That was before Harrenhal, before the road, before she watched men die for sport and heard the way a man can laugh while a boy burns. Nothing is safe in war, she thinks now. Not really. Hope comes anyway, quick and hot, a small fire in her chest she does not know how to smother. Robb could be just beyond those doors. Her mother too, hands folded the way she does when she is thinking, eyes sharp enough to cut through any fray trick. What if she walks in and they are there, whole and breathing and close enough to touch? What if all the running ends in this room? She does not let the hope soften her. Harrenhal taught her that too. Her eyes move without seeming to, counting doors, measuring the distance to the courtyard, noting which guards lean on their spears and which ones keep their hands close to the haft. She thinks of knives, of tankards, of the iron hooks on the walls where torches burn. Every face is a question. Every smile is a cost waiting to be named. A servant hurries past them then, head bowed, carrying a tray with a careful, trembling balance. On it, a round of dark bread, a shallow dish of coarse white salt. Guessed right, made visible. He moves with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, but his eyes are too wide, the whites showing in the torchlight. For a heartbeat he glances at Arya, as if a word is pressing at the back of his teeth, as if he might break and let it spill. He does not. He lowers his gaze, swallows whatever warning wanted to live, and walks on toward the hall where Robb Stark is still a guest. For the moment. What if the girl who arrives at the Twins is not Arya Stark of Winterfell at all, but a thin, hard-edged shadow stitched together from borrowed names and half-remembered lessons? What if the stone bridge and the twin towers catch not a lady returning home, but a weapon still trying to remember it was once a child? She walks where the Frey man has gone, boots whispering over cold stone, and in the quiet between each step she counts herself. Ari, Yoren had called her, the way a man names a colt he means to keep alive. Weasel in the stinking carts, when she learned that a name could be as filthy and disposable as the rags on her back. Nan at Harrenhal, small and bent and invisible, carrying water while men screamed. The ghost in Harrenhal, they whispered, when people started dying and no one saw the hand that did it. None of those names fit here. None of them know how to walk into a lord's hall and be a sister again. Her fingers keep twitching toward a weight that is not there. Needle is far away, lost in a room of stone at the edge of another river, and still her hand remembers the feel of the hilt, the way important words had wrapped around it when Jon placed it in her grasp with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Now her palm closes on nothing, opening and closing against the thin fabric of her sleeve, as if she might conjure steel by stubbornness alone. Her shoulders hunch, drawing in, the old habit of making herself smaller, less noticeable, something a man's eye might slide past. She keeps to the wall. She counts guards without meaning to, lips moving soundlessly. The two at the door, the one on the stair, the crossbowman above the gatehouse. She notes doors and shadows, the way a man might inventory coin before a costly gamble. Syrio Forel's voice moves with her, quiet as breath. See with all your senses, little one. The air tastes of river damp and old rushes and meat fat, but under it, faint and sour, there is something else. Smoke, remembered, burning. Harrenhal lives behind her eyes, the pink, greasy smell of flesh over fire. The sound of Tickler's questions and the way important words, where is the gold, where is the brotherhood, could turn a man's body into a map of pain. She does not trust halls anymore. She does not trust banners or bread or the smile on any lord's face. Guessed right is a story adults tell. She has seen what stories cost. And yet, when she lets her guard slip, even for a heartbeat, Something warmer pushes in. Rob's smile, crooked and boyish, when he used to let her ride with him along the walls. Her mother's hand, tired but gentle, smoothing her hair after some small childhood storm. The rough laughter of northern men in Winterfell's great hall, a sound like low thunder, safe and familiar. She can almost feel the heat of the fire there, see the way the light caught in the banners. What if that warmth is only a door away now? What if she could step through and be only a sister, only a daughter for a little while? The stone beneath her boots is cold. Her clothes are thin, travel-worn, stiff with old sweat and river water. Every inch of her says distance. Roads walked, nights slept under hedges, the darkness of woods where wolves howl and men are worse. She has come so far to be almost home, and the almost presses on her ribs like a blade. She pauses in a narrow passage where the torches sputter and the shadows are deep. In that small flickering space, she feels the split inside her as sharp as any cut. Is she the girl who will run into Rob's arms if she sees him, sobbing, clinging, letting herself be held until the world makes sense again? Or is she the girl who waits in the doorway, watching, weighing faces and weapons and exits, ready to move first if the room turns? What if that choice, not any sword, not any lord's word, becomes the hinge of everything that follows? She does not know yet. She only knows that she will have to decide before this night is done. And somewhere ahead, music is starting. Not the soft, harmless music she remembers. Something else. She listens and keeps walking toward it. The sound reaches her first. Not the scream she half remembers from other nights, other courtyards, but a muddled warmth of pipes and strings, of men trying to laugh like peace has weight again. Inside the twins, the great hall is all stone and smoke and candlelight. Long trestle tables run like low roads beneath banners that should never have shared a room. The leaping trout of Tully, the grey direwolf of Stark, hung beside the pale blue of the twin towers. Candles gutter in iron sconces, their flames bowing whenever the heavy doors shift, casting the sigils into brief, uneasy shadow. Robb Stark sits beneath those banners as if beneath a sky that has forgotten how to snow. His shoulders are straight from habit, not from strength. The way a man holds himself when he knows too many eyes are measuring every small failure. He speaks of crossings and recompense, of alliance and amends. His voice courteous, his smile careful, the words themselves offered with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. He does not know that someone else has already decided the cost of this night. Catelyn watches more than she eats. Her fingers toy with the rim of her cup, but her eyes move from fray to fray, cataloguing slights the way other women might count jewels. A daughter who will not quite meet Robb's gaze. A son who smirks when the musicians falter. A serving girl who pours wine to the very brim, as if eager to see it spill. She notes the forced smiles, the too loud toasts, the way important words like honour and guest seem to land flat in the room, without echo, as if the stone itself refuses to carry them. At the high table, Lord Walder Frey presides like a spider that has grown tired of pretending to be anything else. His eyes are pale and watery, always moving, never softening. Grease shines on his fingers, on the corners of his mouth, clinging to him like another skin. When he laughs, it begins in his throat, but never quite reaches the rest of the hall. Men hear the sound and do not join it. They only glance toward him, gauging which way the wind of his favour is blowing this moment. His brood drifts through the hall, sons and daughters and grandsons, arranged with the deliberation of pieces on a board, closing spaces, filling gaps. There are other details, small enough to overlook if a man wishes to believe in safety. A door near the kitchens that no longer opens as wide as it did at midday, its iron ring turned inward, not out. Extra casks of wine rolled close to the musicians, their hoops new tight, their placement just wrong enough to matter. guards in fray colours lingering not at Robb's back, as courtesy would suggest, but near the exits, hands resting on spears with too much readiness for a feast. In a shadowed side passage, a servant lifts a bolt into place with slow, practised care, as if this has been rehearsed. Beyond those thick walls, Arya stands in the chill air, close enough now that the music is no longer a blur but a pattern. Pipes testing a melody, a drum finding its beat. A cheer rises, sudden and muffled, at some unseen toast, then breaks apart into voices she cannot name. Somewhere to her left, two men argue in low, harsh words. The sound carried thinly through stone and wood, and then cut off as if a hand has closed over a mouth. The air feels wrong here, too still for a place so full of people, as if the twins themselves are holding their breath. Arya cannot say why, only that the hairs along her arms lift the way they used to when her father walked into a room with bad news hidden behind his eyes. What if she is already too late? What if she is just early enough to matter? The questions move through her like a cold wind off Winterstone. She shifts her weight, counting her own choices the way her mother is counting Freys, though she does not know that. Forward to the doors, or back to the dark? Toward the music, or away from it? She listens as the tuning in the hall settles into something more certain, a song being chosen. Inside, hands close around cups and knives. Outside, Arya Stark draws one slow breath and steps closer, not yet knowing that the next sound she hears will decide who lives long enough to remember this night. The next sound is not a song at all. It is laughter, thick and careless, leaking through the heavy doors like spilled wine, the kind that makes men forget whose colours they wear and what promises they swore. Two Frey guards lean on their spears to either side of the entrance, the way a man leans on a story he has told too often. One yawns without shame, the other scratches at the edge of his mail, eyes half-lidded, listening more to the music within than to the quiet corridor behind him. The torches along the stone show a narrow strip of light, then shadow, then the darker shape of Sandor Clegane, and in front of him, small and rigid, Arya Stark. She stands just out of sight of the doors, pressed into a shallow curve of wall. The stone is cold through her borrowed clothes. The air smells of smoke and roasting meat, of wet wool and spilled ale, and beneath it, fainter, steel. She can hear the muffled roar of voices, the scrape of chairs, the rise of a song she almost knows. Almost. Her fingers curl at her sides. One choice is simple, and it burns in her like a sudden fire. She could run forward now, push past the guards before they understand what she is, burst into that bright room and shout Robb's name the way she used to call for him in the yard at Winterfell. What if he turned at once? What if her mother's face changed and the whole hall stopped to listen? But what if they did not? What if the guards caught her before she reached the table, dragged her back by the hair, some Frey lordling laughing as he ordered her tied, or worse, handed over as a pretty hostage to be bartered in darker rooms? Harrenhal rises in her memory like another castle of stone around her, the crack of Whipmaster's lash, the way important words were traded over her head while she poured wine and tried not to be seen. She remembers how close she came to being taken there, how often she survived only because she was no one worth noticing. Behind her, Sandor shifts, the rasp of leather and chain, a low warning. He does not touch her, but his voice finds her ear in a grudging murmur. "Girl," he says, and the word is rough but not unkind. Halls like that are where men die. Banners don't stop knives when there's wine on the tables. You rush in there, they'll have you on a hook before your brother even hears you. He speaks of death as if it were weather, something that comes and goes and settles where it will. Better to wait. Let me go in, or we find another way. A kitchen door, a servant's stare. You want to help your Wolf King. You don't do it by screaming at his feast. The words land with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Arya stares at the grain of the stone opposite her, at the thin line of light under the great doors. Duty presses in on her from both sides. To run to her family, To be the little girl who flings herself at her brother's chest and feels his arms close around her would be one kind of choice. To stay in the shadow and listen, to trust the dark prickle at the back of her neck that says something is wrong, is another. She thinks of her list, of all the names she whispers to herself in the cold, and understands that every name has a cost. If she is taken, there will be no one left to speak them. If she is foolish now, she may lose even the chance to try. So she breathes once, slow, and steps back from the door instead of toward it. The desperate urge to run inside claws at her throat, but she swallows it down like bad water. Her palm finds the wall, rough and chill, and she lets her hand slide along the stone as if swearing an oath to herself in silence. "All right," she says, barely more than a breath. "Not the hall? The kitchens?" A servant girl can go where a lord's sister cannot. A shadow can slip past laughter and knives. Without another word, Arya Stark turns away from the doors of the feast and follows the smell of smoke and boiling fat into the deeper passages of the twins, not yet knowing what waits for her on the other side of the next door she dares to open. What if the choice is as small as turning left instead of right in a stone corridor that smells of grease and old smoke? What if that single turn carries her not toward the music and banners, but into the hidden machinery of the feast itself, where the shape of the coming darkness is already being laid out on platters and in whispered words? The heat hits her first. It rolls out of the kitchens in waves, thicker than any fog on the Trident, a wall of oven fire and boiling steam that beads sweat along her hairline and makes the air feel heavy in her chest. Smoke drifts from open hearths, carrying the sharp smell of onions catching at the edge of burning, of fat dripping onto coals, of fresh blood still clinging to joints of meat waiting to be turned. Servants move through it all in a restless current, shouting over one another as they rush past with trenchers and jugs of wine. The way a man might shout on a battlefield, simply to be heard. Arya does what she has learned to do in every crowded room since King's Landing. She makes herself smaller. She lowers her eyes. She reaches for the nearest empty tray with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Careful, precise, as if the right grip might make her invisible. Sirio's voice lives somewhere at the back of her skull. Softer now, but still steady. Become the cat. Become the wall. Become the thing no one thinks to see. So she copies the other serving girls, the hurried stoop of their shoulders, the quick, quiet steps, the way they slide past lords without ever truly entering their gaze. The kitchens themselves are a maze. Narrow passages open into hotter, louder rooms, then back into cooler corridors where barrels of ale and casks of wine wait in the half-dark. It is in one of those in-between spaces, where the light from the kitchens dies but the roar of the hall has not yet begun, that she hears it, not music, voices. There is a half-closed door ahead, warped the way the solar door in Winterfell once was, a hanging curtain of greasy linen pulled across most of the gap. She should keep walking. She does not. The word fray catches at her like a hook, followed by the scrape of wood on stone, the low grunt of men shifting something heavy. "Get the rest of the crossbows up there before the bedding," one says, his voice flat with the understanding of long practice. Lord Walder wants them in place. She edges closer, the tray held against her chest, her breath shallow. She can see only boots beneath the curtain, the shadow of movement. "Bolton will give the signal," another answers. "You keep the musicians close. When they start the song, you bar the doors. No one leaves the hall alive this time." She does not hear everything. She hears enough. The way important words sit in the air, bedding, signal, no one leaves, tells her more than any careful explanation could. A song. Doors barred from the outside. Crossbows above, not guarding, but waiting. For a heartbeat, she thinks it might be her own fear making monsters out of ordinary talk. The frays are petty. They are cruel. But this? Yet the voices on the other side of the curtain are calm, almost bored, the way a man speaks of slaughtering pigs before winter. Arya's breath catches, sharp and cold despite the heat. Something is wrong. Not a child's imagining, not a story to frighten squires, but a choice already made in some other room, at some other table. And in the hall beyond these walls, her mother and her brother are laughing beneath banners that have already, in truth, become shrouds. What can she do with only a tray in her hands and a name no one here will honour? She leaves the tray where it is, bread and salt abandoned on a splintered table, as if by setting them down she is setting down the last protections these walls still pretend to offer. Her bare feet are already moving, skin against cold stone, slipping where some careless Frey has spilled ale. The stolen dagger a hard, living weight in her hand. The corridors of the twins are a tangle of narrow turns and low beams, rooms that smell of onions and wet wool, and too many bodies pressed together. Arya runs through them like a shadow that has remembered it once belonged to a girl. She does not think of plans. She thinks of her mother's laugh from the hall, of Robb's voice, deeper now in her memory than it was when she last stood beside him in winter light. The first door she finds toward the great hall is not the main way, but a side entrance, half hidden behind barrels and a slant of darkness. A Frey guard blocks it, bored, helm crooked, fingers stained with grease. She comes up short so quickly her toes burn. "I have a message," she says, the word scraping her throat. "For the king." The way important words catch is its own kind of truth. King. She sees Robb as he was in the yard at Winterfell. Snow in his hair, not a crown. For a heartbeat she cannot force the title past her teeth. The guard snorts, eyes moving over her torn clothes, the hunger in her face. "What king?" he asks, and there is something in his tone that makes the room feel smaller. What if he lets her pass? What if this single bored Frey, with his crooked helm and greasy fingers, becomes the hinge upon which everything turns? Or what if this is the first wall she cannot climb, the first door that will not open no matter how sharp the dagger she carries? He does not move. His hand drifts toward his sword with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, not afraid exactly, merely certain. She steps back before he can decide what she is. There is another way. There is always another way if you are small and quiet and no one is looking for you. In the warren of passages behind the hall, she finds it, an antechamber where the noise of feasting comes through the stone like a distant storm. A maid has just left. The room smells of wine and rain-damp wool. And Catelyn Stark is there, alone for a moment that should not exist. The reunion is not graceful. Arya is suddenly in her arm's reach, all elbows and bone, the dagger half raised before she remembers to lower it. Her mother's hand flies to her mouth, then to Arya's cheek, then to her shoulder, as if touch is the only proof that matters. "Arya." The word is almost a prayer, almost a wound. There is no time for stories, no time for the long road from King's Landing, for Harrenhal, for the Brotherhood, for the Hound. She speaks of none of it. She speaks of crossbows in the rafters, of the way the kitchen boys would not meet her eyes, of Rose Bolton's quiet, watchful silence at table, of the wrongness that feels like a hand already closing around Robb's throat. Would any mother believe this, from a half-starved child who vanished into the war and has now stepped out of its shadow with a Frey dagger in her fist? Would any queen of the North dare to act on it, knowing the cost if she is wrong, the cost if she is right? Catelyn's fingers tighten on Arya's shoulders until it hurts. She is searching her daughter's changed face, the dirt and hollows and new hardness there, for the girl who once chased cats through Winterfell's quiet halls. Her eyes are wet, but her voice, when it comes, is iron. "Tell me everything," she says. And as Arya drags the words up, as she tries to lay them out with the clarity of a map and not the chaos of a nightmare, the first thin notes of a song begin to seep under the door. A Lannister song, a southern song, The rains of Castamere, distant but unmistakable. Catelyn hears it. Arya sees the understanding pass over her mother's face like a cloud crossing the sun. A choice is there, suddenly, in the room with them, as real as the dagger between Arya's fingers. Move now, or be too late. But which way is safety, and which way is the trap already waiting to be sprung? The room feels smaller when the song reaches them, not louder, smaller, as if the stone itself is listening and drawing in around mother and daughter, pressing the air thin. Catelyn's hands ache. They have ached all day, the dull, grinding pain in her fingers and wrists that has followed her since the long rides, the cold camps, the endless work of holding a kingdom together with letters and promises, and the last shreds of her husband's name. The weight of Robb's crown is not on her head, but she feels it in the bend of her spine, in the tightness at the base of her skull, in the quiet, relentless thrum of fear that has lived in her since Bran fell, since Ned did not come home. She looks at the girl before her, and for a breath does not understand what she is seeing. The face is too thin, the jaw set in a way no child's should be, the eyes dark and watchful, old in a way that has nothing to do with years. There is mud on Arya's sleeve, a brown, flaking smear that does not belong in a lord's guest room. There is a dagger in her hand as if it grew there. Recognition comes like pain. Joy first, sharp and wild, that this lost child has found her way back through so much darkness. Horror right behind it, colder, at the cost carved into Arya's bones. What has the world done to you, little one? What have we allowed it to do? Arya's words pour out with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, except she is no man, and there is no care left for pacing. Harrenhal, a one-eared man, a tickler. Names she whispers at night like prayers turned inside out. Frey servants talking of crossbows where lutes should be, of doors that will be barred, of meat and wine laid out as if for a feast for the dead. The rains of Castamere, she says, her voice catching on the word the way important words sometimes do when they are too large for a small throat. Catelyn listens. She does not interrupt. She does not tell Arya that this is impossible, that guest right is older than any fray, that to spill blood beneath a host's roof is to set fire to the very idea of safety in this winter-bound world. Her mind moves anyway. Walder Frey, slighted. The Lannisters, ruthless. Rose Bolton, quiet as old snow, never quite warm at the fire. The North's banners outside, trusting. What if Arya is wrong? What if she is right? To accuse a host of murder before the first cup is drained would be to shatter the fragile bridge Robb has built. To do nothing would be to stand still while the shadow falls. She makes a choice. Stay here, Catelyn says at last, each word placed with the same care she once used to lift sleeping children from their beds. Say nothing, to no one. She will test the warning first. She will look for crossbows where there should be music. She will find Robb, draw him aside, speak of danger without yet naming treason. It is only a little time she is buying. But how much time is there once the song has already begun? The hall is the same hall. The same smoke-blackened rafters, the same banners drooping in the heavy air, the same long tables littered with bones and spilled wine. Yet when Catelyn steps back into that room, it feels as if some thin skin has been stripped away, and what lies beneath is raw and waiting. Every laugh sounds a little too sharp. Every clatter of cup on wood lands like a warning. She moves with care, not hurrying, not slowing, the way a man crossing river ice tests each step without looking down. Her eyes do the looking. To the doors first. There are more Frey men at the exits than she remembers. A small forest of drab, grey and muddy brown. Hands never far from sword belts that should have been unbuckled in comfort by now. It is late. Men grow careless at this hour. These men do not. Rose Bolton sits where he has always sat, near enough to speak to Robb, far enough to be his own weather. His presence is a kind of stillness in the room, a pool of quiet in the middle of the feast. He does not drink deeply. He does not shout for more meat. His pale eyes move without haste, taking in the hall piece by piece and giving nothing back. One hand rests near his knife, fingers loose, the posture of someone for whom steel is simply another part of the body. She watches the way he inclines his head when a Frey servant leans close, the way important words can be hidden inside the smallest, blandest gestures. He speaks of nothing when he speaks aloud, offering Robb some cool remark about the cost of winter campaigns and the prudence of conserving strength. Beneath the table, his hand never quite leaves the knife. A musician passes near, the case on his back heavier than it has any right to be for a set of pipes and a fiddle. Catelyn feels her throat tighten. Another man at the far wall adjusts his own case with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, except there is no table, only stone. She follows the line of his movement to a side door she has walked through a dozen times today. A servant is there, young, forgettable, his head bowed. He slides a bolt into place with a small final sound that seems, to her, louder than the whole hall. That door has always stood open to the night air. What if Arya is not chasing ghosts? What if this is the shape treason wears? A closed door, a too heavy case, a lord whose hand never strays far from steel. She goes to Walder Frey because there is nowhere else to go without crying alarm. His dais is a little island of sour flesh and thin pride, his eyes bright with mean amusement. She speaks lightly, or tries to. A word about the size of his guard, about how well he is watched tonight. A word about the lateness of the hour, and whether his men might not be better served with sleep than standing. He leers, of course. He complains of his age, of his back, of the burden of hosting kings. He makes a joke about northern appetites. On the surface, nothing changes. Yet when she mentions the guards again, there is the smallest pause, the briefest flicker in his gaze toward the doors before he buries it under a sneer. She has spent a life reading men who would not be read. She sees it, the shadow of calculation, the weight of a choice already made. Music swells again behind her. Not the rough, familiar tunes of river feasts, but a different melody, cold and precise, cutting through the warmth like steel drawn in darkness. The first notes of a Lannister song that has no place in this room. The Rains of Castamere begins earlier than it should. Her skin crawls, her breath shortens. Arya's warning is no longer a frightened child's tale. It is in the doors, the knives, the song. And as the hall turns, slowly, to listen, Catelyn understands that whatever she does next will not be in time for everyone. The song swells behind her like a door closing. Arya is already moving. They would not let her through to Robb. Too many guards, too many hard Frey eyes that slid past her as if she were a stray dog in the wrong yard. So she does what she has always done in rooms where no one wants her. She makes herself smaller, thinner, a shadow pressed tight to stone, and looks for another way. The twins are a maze of narrow servant passages, half lit and close, the air thick with the smells of meat, wet wool, and smoke. She slips into them the way a man might slip into a familiar coat, without thinking, only feeling the old rhythm of hiding in Winterfell's walls, of running from Septa Mordane's sharp word or Sansa's laughter. Her feet remember how to be quiet. Her breath remembers how to lie flat in her chest. Behind one tapestry, she finds a slit of space and follows it, fingers brushing rough mortar, until a side door opens into a small storeroom. There should be wine here, or bread, or salt. Instead, she sees crossbows, 6 of them at least, stacked with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Bolts lie bundled beside them, heads oiled and dark. She steps closer. There is a barrel in the corner, unmarked. When she prizes the lid up, the smell that rises is sharp and wrong. Not wine, oil, thick and heavy, the kind they used in Winterfell to keep bowstrings from fraying in the winter air. In a castle that claims peace and guest right, why hide so many bows, so much oil, in a quiet room off the passage? Her anger flares, hot and useless for a moment. If she had been Jon, they would have listened. If she had been Robb, or even Bran before the fall, her word would have carried weight. She remembers the way important words used to move through the hall at Winterfell, passed from man to man while she was sent to her needlework. She remembers being told to leave the room. She does not leave now. Back in the passage, she hears footsteps and flattens herself into another pocket of darkness. A Frey man passes so close she could cut his throat. Instead, she watches his hand, the easy, practiced motion as he slips a knife up his sleeve and smooths his face into something bland. The way a man dresses himself for murder. Doubt presses at her. What if she is wrong? What if her mother looks at her and sees only a frightened girl who hears danger in every shadow? The cost of being wrong is shame. The cost of being right and unheard is blood. Further on, where two passages cross, she hears voices. She stills, every part of her going tight and thin. A captain, by his tone, speaks of timing, of orders. Not before Lord Bolton rises, he says, not before the king's last toast. The words fall softly in the dimness, but they land in her like stones. Now she can see the shape of it. Not only phrase, Bolton, a last toast, a hall full of men with no swords. The music from the main room shifts, threads of the Rains of Castamere seeping through the stone like cold water. Arya finds a dark alcove overlooking a stair and drops into it, knees to her chest, heart beating so loudly she is certain someone will hear. Below, a line of Frey guards moves past, crossbows already in their hands, faces set. They are walking toward the hall. The song is still playing. Arya presses her back to the stone and understands that she has only heartbeats left to choose what to do. In the hall, the music swells and softens, and Robb Stark feels the tiredness in his bones the way a man feels an old wound in winter, dull and insistent beneath every movement. The air is thick with roast meat and watered wine, and the too loud laughter of men who would rather be in their own keeps. He sits beneath the banners of House Frey and House Stark and thinks, not for the first time, of the cost of a broken word. He has rehearsed this night in his mind. The apology, the courtesy, the hope that Walder Frey might accept a queen he did not choose in place of the bride he was promised. What if this small humility could mend a great tearing? What if one old man's pride could be soothed by music and meat and the presence of a king who bowed his head? He speaks of reconciliation to himself because the alternative is too dark to name. Catelyn's hand comes to rest on his arm. Light, almost formal. A word, Robb, she says, and the way important words are always wrapped in something plain is not lost on him. He rises, feeling every league he has ridden and every night he has not slept, and follows her to a quiet corner where the torches do not quite reach. Her face is wrong. Not grief, not the contained anger he has come to know, but a tight, urgent fear that makes her look suddenly younger and older at once. She speaks low, of crossbows in the hands of Frey men, of doors being barred, of a pattern to the guards that no true feast requires. And then, like a blade turned in his chest, she speaks a name. Arya. The room seems to narrow. For a heartbeat, he is not the king in the north, but a boy in Winterfell's yard, watching his little sister chase cats, her hair a dark tangle, her face smudged with dust and stubborn joy. Arya, here, alive. Something in Jon's chest moves in his memory, the way his brother used to smile when Arya bested Bran with a wooden sword. The echo of it hurts. He does not let the hurt show. A king's face is another kind of armour. You are certain? He asks, though he can hear in his mother's voice that she is. Catelyn tells him how Arya spoke, not like a child dreaming monsters, but with the flat, cold understanding of someone who has seen too many men die badly. What if Arya is wrong? What if she has been chased by so much darkness that she sees it now in every shadow? To accuse Walder Frey of planning murder beneath his own roof, under guest right, on the word of a half-starved girl returned from the dead, this is madness. The hall is full of Freys. Rose Bolton sits pale and unreadable. A wrong move here, a wrong word, and Steel will be out in an instant. Yet to do nothing is its own choice, its own kind of betrayal. If he smiles and lifts his cup and lets the music wash over him, and the doors close and the crossbows rise, then every man who falls will have died because he would not listen to Arya. The pattern breaks. For a moment he imagines standing, knocking over the high table, drawing steel and shouting for his banners. He can almost feel grey wind at his side, the hall erupting into fire and blood. Instead, he chooses something smaller, quieter, with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. He leans close to Catelyn, his voice barely more than breath. Orders to have his best men drift nearer the doors, to see that grey wind is brought within the gates, not left in the dark, to keep his sword closer than courtesy demands. He watches Rose, he watches Walder. He smiles when he must. He does not yet believe in slaughter, but he no longer believes in safety either. What if the hall itself could feel the shift before a single sword left its sheath? What if the arrangement of chairs and bodies and glances became the first battlefield, long before anyone named it as such? Robb returns to his seat as the next verse of the song begins, the low strings of the Rains of Castamere drawing a quiet line through the room. He moves as a king should, unhurried, composed, but the way a man places his hand has its own language. His fingers settle nearer the sword at his hip, not resting fully on the hilt, not so far as courtesy would demand. He laughs when a Frey cousin leans in with some coarse remark, but the sound comes out thinner now, the brightness of it not quite reaching his eyes. He does not look at Arya again. He does not look at Catelyn for long. Instead, his gaze keeps circling back to Rose Bolton, to the pale man's still shoulders, and the way important words seem to disappear into the shadow beneath his eyes. Each time Rose lifts his cup, Robb's attention follows, not openly hostile, but with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table and waiting to see if it cracks. Catelyn feels the change travel through him before she sees it. She has lived too many winters beside men who went to war to mistake the tightening at the corners of his mouth. While the next stanza rises, cool and inevitable, she begins to move pieces. A lifted hand, as if to summon more wine. A small tilt of her head toward the great Jon, as though inviting him to share some jest. A quiet word to a passing servant that sends Blackfish Tully angling closer to the high table, his weathered face arranged into something like amusement. One by one the northern lords answer without ever being formally called. The great Jon booms a laugh and shifts his chair, dragging it nearer to Robb under the pretense of better hearing the story. Karstark men edge toward a pillar that stands not far from a side arch. The Blackfish positions himself where he can see both the main doors and the musicians, his hand light on his dagger, his smile for the Freys thin as a blade. The Freys notice. Of course they notice. A son of Walder, red-faced with wine, frowns when he realises the northerners nearest the side door have drifted away, leaving a curious pocket of space where there had been none. A daughter leans close to her father, her whisper lost beneath the next refrain. But the old man's fingers begin to drum against the arm of his chair, an impatient, a rhythmic counterpoint to the steady, merciless beat of the song. Verse by verse, the Rains of Castamere builds, each line another step towards something that has not yet been named aloud. What if this is the last chance either side has to turn back? What if all that remains now is the cost of choices already made? Around the walls, Frey guards tighten their ring, hands nearer to spears, eyes sharper than their lazy postures suggest. Stark men, by design rather than accident, find themselves closer to the main doors, nearer to the courtyard, not penned so neatly between table and wall as they were in another telling of this night. The room feels smaller, the air thicker, as if the very smoke from the torches understands what is coming. Roose Bolton sits where he has always sat, his face a pale mask, his expression unreadable. He speaks of nothing, offers no word that might betray his calculation. But his gaze moves from Robb's hand to Catelyn's signals to the tightening Frey circle. He is weighing something in that darkness behind his eyes. The element of surprise is fraying at the edges, and the hall, every chair and banner and candle, waits like a tinderbox a breath before the spark. The spark comes, not from mercy, but from fear. The scale of what hangs over the hall has already been bought and measured. Tywin's gold has moved in quiet caravans, his promises riding ahead of them like a cold wind. Roose Bolton has weighed the north against his own advancement and found his honour the lighter thing. Walder Frey has counted every slight, every jest, every year he stood in another lord's shadow. Around them, in galleries and doorways and along the walls, Frey men stand with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, hands close to hidden blades and crossbows, faces blank. The darkness here is not an accident, it is design, and yet design does not mean control. Walder feels it first as irritation, like a stone in his boot. The Northerners are not sitting the way they sat in his memory of the plan. Groups have shifted, a bannerman edges nearer to an exit, another keeps his cup full but his eyes clearer than they should be. Robb's hand rests too near his sword, the way a man might rest his fingers on a truth he has not yet spoken. Catelyn's gaze moves over the room like a hawk that has scented something beneath the snow. She does not smile when she should. She counts men. What if they rise too soon? What if word slips out through some side door, and all this cost buys only a half-finished slaughter? He does not like those questions. He does not like feeling watched in his own hall. The music scrapes thinly at his nerves. The way important words have hung in the air tonight, guest, pardon, peace, has begun to taste like mockery. Somewhere in the back of his mind sits the knowledge of Tywin's distance, of how far the Lannister cavalry truly is if this goes wrong. Roose Bolton's stillness beside him offers no comfort. That man is a shadow in human shape, and Walder understands dimly that such shadows do not belong to anyone but themselves. So he makes a choice. Earlier than agreed, earlier than is wise, he lets the irritation harden into decision. A curt nod toward the musicians. A brief, sideways glance to Bolton. The smallest lifting of 2 fingers toward the men at the doors. It is nothing. Almost. It is everything. The tune stumbles, then shifts. Hands go not to strings, but to wood and iron. One crossbow rises, but its first bolt does not find a king's chest this time. It thuds instead into the throat of the bannerman nearest the archway, the one who had been inching toward the outside air, pinning him to the stone with a wet, surprised sound. For a heartbeat, the room holds its breath. Then the killing begins without the smooth inevitability Tywin paid for. Tables overturn, wine and blood and candle wax spill together, small rivers of fire licking at fallen rushes. Northerners who were meant to die seated are already half standing, hands closing around sword hilts, axes, the heavy legs of benches. The way a man moves when winter finally arrives and he has been expecting it all his life. Outside, in a narrow corridor that smells of stone and meat and river damp, Arya Stark hears the first scream split the music. She does not yet know whose voice it is. She hears enough. Steel rings, a door slams, smoke begins to creep along the ceiling like a new shadow taking shape. And Arya, one hand already on the little blade at her belt, has a single shattering understanding. She is not too late. She is inside the fire as it catches. The music does not stop all at once. It falters, catches, like a man missing a step on a stair he has walked his whole life, and then the first crossbow bolt sings through the hall. Sound travels strangely in stone. The roar of overturned benches reaches Arya as a dull, rolling thunder, but the first scream comes clear, a single high note that splits the tune in 2. Somewhere ahead, a body hits the floor with a wet, final thud. Bone on stone, meat on stone. The sort of sound she has heard before in yards and alleys, but never with so many voices rising around it, never with music still trying to pretend that nothing important has changed. The way important words sometimes try to sit quietly beside a table full of lies. She moves before thought can form. There is no weighing of cost, no choice in any real sense. Her feet are already pounding down the narrow corridor, the stolen dagger warm against her palm, the air thick with smoke and spilled wine. Behind her, Sandor's boots crash against the flagstones, heavy, unwilling. He swears once, low and vicious, as another volley of bolts is loosed and the hall answers with a deeper, angrier roar. He understands now. He is inside the trap as surely as any wolf in that room. "Girl, stop," he begins, but Arya does not. The word breaks against her back and falls away. The small door ahead of her flies open instead, hard enough to jar in its hinges, and a Freyguard bursts into the passage, head turned toward the screaming, sword already half out, searching for fleeing guests to herd back toward their deaths. He almost runs into her. There is a heartbeat. One, no more, where his eyes register only a child, thin and travel-stained, where his mouth begins to shape a question. What if he had finished it? What if he had spoken and in speaking remembered guest right, or mercy, or his own daughter's faces? He does not. Arya's arm is moving as his lips part. The blade finds the soft place under his ribs, where leather gives and flesh opens. She feels the resistance, then the sudden sliding ease as steel goes home. His breath leaves him in a surprised grunt, hot against her cheek, and his sword clatters from fingers, already forgetting how to hold. Warm blood spills over her hand. It is thicker than she imagined, almost sticky, and it runs between her fingers in slow, deliberate lines, like ink tracing out a name. Her mind flickers to her list, the quiet cadence of it in the darkness of the nights by the fire, and for a strange, suspended instant, she half expects this man's name to be there, waiting. It is not. He is only a Frey, only one grey stone in a larger wall. Yet something in her chest shifts, not with fear, but with an understanding that this death feels different. This is not the desperate, scrambling violence of survival in a city that never knew her name. This is an answer given back to the hall behind him, to the wolves being cut down under their own banners. Vengeance has a weight. She feels it settle into her wrist. The guard slumps, sliding down the dagger until his body folds at her feet. Arya pulls the blade free with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, wipes it once on his cloak without quite knowing why, and stands over him, chest heaving. The corridor suddenly very quiet in her ears. Then the pattern breaks. More footsteps, many this time, hammer toward her from deeper within the twins, a new thunder rolling under the screams. Steel scrapes. A man shouts an order she cannot quite catch. For a heartbeat, Arya is still. Fight here, in this narrow throat of stone, or turn toward the fire and the room where her mother and brother may already be shadows on the floor. Which duty does a wolf choose when winter comes all at once? She has to decide before the next door opens. What if the song breaks but not cleanly? What if the first crossbow bolt flies into a hall that is already half on its feet, already half turned toward the shadow behind the music? The room fractures into moments rather than a single, smooth betrayal. A bench goes over with a crash, wine and mutton sliding, as a northern lord kicks it onto its side with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Another man's hand is already on his sword because Robb's quiet word has reached him. Not the full truth, but enough. Be ready. Steel scrapes from scabbards in the same breath that the first Frey quarrels fall from the balconies like hard black rain. There is no ordered shield wall, no clean line of battle. Instead, there are islands. Here, 3 Karstark men-at-arms overturn a trestle and crouch behind it, boots slipping in gravy and blood, returning hurried blows at Freys who rush in with daggers. There, a cluster of Manderley retainers drag their lord behind a pillar, using the stone as cover while they scan the dark rafters for the glint of crossbows. The way important words move through a hall has changed the shape of the slaughter. It is still a trap, but the jaws do not close all at once. Some fates bend. The great Jon, who in another telling dies roaring and drunk in the centre of the room, has drifted closer to an archway, restless with the same unease that has tightened Catelyn's hands. When the music stutters and the first bolts hiss past, he does not freeze. He drives his shoulder into the nearest fray, smashes through a half-open door, and vanishes into the smoke and confusion of the outer passage, a living piece of northern fury instead of a fallen giant. Other pieces were never on the board. Brynden Tully, who has never trusted Walder Frey's smile, is not in the room at all. He walks the courtyard with a lantern, counting torches, watching the walls, hearing the music as a thin, strained thing. When the first screams rise, he is already shouting orders, already drawing men to him. The counter-attack that never came in one winter now surges from stables and gatehouse, Blackfish Steel meeting Freymen who expected only butchery, not a war inside their own castle. At the high table, the centre holds a little longer. Robb's chair goes over backward as Catelyn lunges, pulling him sideways just enough that the first volley tears through meat and wood instead of his heart. He takes a bolt through the shoulder rather than the chest. It spins him, slams him against the carved back of the chair. Pain blooms, hot and immediate, but he is breathing. He is on his knees with his sword in his hand, shouting for Grey Wind, for his banners, for any man who still hears him over the roar. He does not command as he once did, standing straight in open field with the wind in his hair. Blood runs down his arm, his fingers numb, and every order costs him breath. Yet a knot of men forms around him, Umber, Glover, a handful of Tully guards, making a small, desperate fortress at the very place that was meant to be his grave. Catelyn is not only a witness, she has lived too long in rooms where men's choices carry a cost to stay still now. She snatches a fallen man's dagger from the rushes, the handle slick, and when a Frey lunges toward Robb's exposed side, she meets him with a slash that opens his throat. There is no wild scream, no collapse into madness. Her earlier suspicion hardens into something colder, a narrow, terrible understanding that if she cannot save her son's crown, she can at least buy him another heartbeat. She moves with the grim steadiness of a woman who has already lost too much to be afraid of what comes next. Above them, on the balconies, Frey crossbowmen reload with frantic hands. Their advantage is real, but no longer absolute. Men are moving, dodging, dragging wounded under tables instead of sitting politely to die. Outside, Blackfish-led riverlords hammer at doors that should have stayed closed. Inside, the Great Jon's escape has torn a ragged hole in the Frey circle. The Red Wedding in this telling is still a horror. The music still curdles into screaming. The torches still throw long shadows over bodies that never had a chance to finish their cups. Yet it is no longer a clean, one-sided butchery performed upon trusting guests. Arya's warning has turned it into a brawl in the dark, a desperate bloody struggle where some who once died now live, and others who once lived will not see the dawn. Different survivors will walk away from this room. Different ghosts will linger here when the fire burns low. And outside, in that narrow throat of stone, Arya Stark is still choosing which door to open. The door she chooses opens on smoke. It moves low along the stones at first, a grey animal nosing through the corridor, then thickens, climbs, takes the room into itself. Rushes smoulder underfoot. Somewhere close a tapestry has caught, the dye in the wool giving off a bitter, choking scent as it burns. The air is a tangle of wine and blood and old grease, turned by heat into something that clings to the back of her throat. Servants run through it like startled birds flushed from a hedge. A girl in Frey blue with her hair half unbound, clutching a tray as if it were a shield. A boy no older than Arya, with soot on his face and bare reddened feet. Some flee heads down, hands over their ears against the screams. Others are seized mid-flight, rough Frey hands closing on collars and wrists, dragging them back toward the hall, toward the fire and the music that has turned to slaughter. Arya moves the way a man might move through a practice yard when he knows every rut and loose stone. Not because she knows this place, but because she has learned the cost of hesitating. She keeps to the shadow along the wall, her smallness for once a kind of armour. Men crash past her, steel ringing, cloaks flaring, and she is only a thin streak of darkness between them. An axe whistles across her path, close enough that she feels the air of it on her cheek. She drops all the way to the filthy rushes, and the blade buries itself in a beam with a shudder. Before the Frey can wrench it free, a crossbow clatters from his companion's hands, skidding toward him. Arya's boot snaps out, hard, sending it spinning under a toppled bench. She does not wait to watch him curse. She does not look back at all. Find mother, find Robb. The words beat in her like a second heart, louder even than the drums. Through half-open doors, the night breaks into sharp, unbearable fragments. In one room, she sees Robb only for a breath, his sword arm slick with blood, sleeve dark and heavy, his jaw set in that quiet, stubborn line she remembers from Winterfell when he would not yield the practice yard. Frey men press him, their blades flashing in the murk. He does not fall in that instant. He does not look her way. Another door, another slice of understanding. Catelyn Stark with her back to a pillar, hair loose, face streaked and strange in the firelight, a knife small in her hand, but held with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Her lips move. Arya cannot hear the words, only sees the way important words shape a mouth, the way a plea becomes a command when there is no time left. She sees a northern bannerman she does not know by name step in front of a boy in a too large surcoat, taking 3 blades meant for the squire's thin chest. He folds without ceremony. The boy screams once and then is lost in the crush. Fear moves through her, cold and absolute, like winter water over stone. The child part of her wants to push a door wide, to run to them, to sob out their names until someone answers. But there is another part now, hard and narrow, that counts faces instead. This Frey with the fox fur collar, laughing as he cuts. That one with the yellowed teeth and the slow, careful way he reloads his quarrels. She lists them the way she once mouthed prayers, each one a promise. If she lives, if there is a later, smoke thickens. Somewhere a beam gives way with a long, low groan. She coughs, wipes her eyes with the heel of her hand, and follows the pull of sound toward a side door she knows must open into the great hall. It is almost a relief when she sees it, a dark rectangle at the end of the corridor, light bleeding out around its edges. The roar of voices louder here, the music gone to chaos. She runs for it now, abandoning stealth, boots slipping on spilled wine and worse. This close, she can hear her mother's voice, or thinks she can. What if she is one step away? What if everything changes if she can put her hand on that latch? She reaches the door, the same breath a knot of Frey men reach it from within. It slams in her face with a hollow, final sound, and the bar drops across the other side. Iron on iron. The impact sends a shiver through the wood and through Arya's bones alike. She stands there, palm flat to the cold plank, feeling the room beyond her like a fire she cannot touch. There is no time to weep, no time to beat her fists and beg. There is only the corridor, the smoke, the other doors. If this way is closed, another must open, or someone else must be dragged out before the flames take them. She turns, already choosing, already measuring which life she might still reach in time, and which death she is willing to carry with her into whatever comes after this night. Smoke crawls low along the stones, as if it too is trying to escape. Sandor Clegane tastes it at the back of his throat, bitter and hot, and his first clear thought is the simplest one a man like him ever has. Get out. He has seen halls turn to slaughter before. He knows the way a man's voice changes when the killing has already been decided. The way important words like guessed right and peace become soft things, easily broken. The twins are a trap closing its jaws, and every instinct he trusts tells him to turn his horse, find a postern gate, ride until this music and this screaming are nothing but another shadow in a long, dark road. A Frey in half armour stumbles into the passage, sword out, eyes wide with the sick understanding of someone who thought he was on the winning side and has just realised there are no safe sides tonight. Sandor does not hesitate. The sword comes up, the man goes down, and Sandor is already stripping a shield from his arm before the body finishes falling. He moves the way a man moves who has lived too long by choosing the path that leads out, not in. The corridor ahead is choked with small folk, servants and singers, and girls with wine on their skirts instead of blood. For the moment, they panic toward him, away from the hall. He lowers his shoulder, lets the shield become a battering ram, not cruel, not kind, only efficient. A gap opens, a way out. He can smell the night air beyond, cold and clean, a promise of distance from this fire and this treachery. And then the pattern breaks, not a sound, a glimpse. Dark hair, quick as a darting shadow, vanishing around a corner, but not towards safety. Toward the hall, toward the music that has turned to knives. He knows that run. He has watched her pace beside the road, restless as a hound on a short leash, whenever they drew near a crossing or a banner she half recognised. Arya Stark, always angling toward her pack, toward some room where her family might be waiting if she is just fast enough, brave enough, stubborn enough. What if he lets her go now? What if she dies in there and he rides free? Gold in his saddlebags and no more wolf girl snapping at his heels. He stands for a heartbeat in the smoke, shield heavy on his arm, the choice heavier still. Sansa's face flickers across his mind, pale in torchlight, trusting him in a city that smelled of rot and secrets. The heat on his skin remembers another hall, another fire. The way a man's screams sound when the people who should have protected him are the ones holding him to the flames. Knights speaking of honour with their mouths while their hands do other work. He does not believe in oaths. He does not believe in songs. He believes in steel, in horses, in the clean arithmetic of killing or being killed. Yet this girl keeps walking into the cost of other men's choices as if she were born to carry them. He snarls a curse that is more like a wound than a word, turns his back on the open way and starts toward the hall instead. Each step drives him deeper into Stark business, into Lannister wrath, into a night that will not easily be forgotten. And with that single, unwilling turn, the battle at the twins begins to bend around the hound and the girl he refuses to abandon. What if, in the moment Sandor turns back toward the hall, Arya finds not a dead end, but a narrow breathing chance? The servant's stare is half hidden behind a warped door, its edge furred with old grease and kitchen smoke. She slips through the gap the way a shadow slips along a wall, pressed tight, listening to the muffled roar of the feast below. The stone under her bare feet is cold, the air close, smelling of spilled ale and the sour wool of wet cloaks hung to dry. Each step upward feels like walking into a throat that is about to close. She does not know where the stair ends. She knows only that the music has changed, that the song is wrong, that the way important words change a room, this tune has changed the air. Steel under strings, malice under laughter. She climbs faster. The stair opens onto a narrow gallery above the main hall, a spine of wood and dust running along the wall. From here, she can see everything. The torches below throw a restless, uneven fire over the tables, over the banners, over the bodies. Men she has followed across half the riverlands are slumped on benches or sprawled on the rushes, pin-cushioned with quarrels. Frey men move among them with knives, finishing what the crossbows began. Arya goes still, a small, hard point of silence above a storm. For a heartbeat, she is only a girl watching her world be unmade. Then her eyes find her mother. Catelyn is backed against a stone pillar near the high table, her hair loose, her face raw with understanding. One hand is red to the wrist. Before her, a Frey man advances with his sword already drawn, the way a man might walk toward a tethered goat. Behind him, Walder Frey lifts a trembling hand, 2 fingers flicking in a signal that means seize her, hold her, use her. There is no time for words, no time for plans, only a single, terrible choice. Arya moves. She swings a leg over the rail, lowers herself with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, then lets go. The drop to the lower ledge knocks the breath from her, but she does not cry out. Another short fall, and she is on the Frey's back, all bone and fury and forward motion. The dagger finds his neck because Syrio taught her where the body is soft, and because winter has taught her that hesitation has a cost. Her hand drives the blade in, sideways, hard. Hot blood spatters her face, her dress, her mother's skirts. The man jerks, gurgles, folds. For a moment the hall narrows to 2 pairs of eyes. Catelyn stares at her as if at a ghost, as if the quiet prayers she has whispered for lost children have suddenly taken on flesh and steel. Arya's eyes are dark and flat, full of things she will never have the words to tell. She does not smile. She does not explain. She only meets her mother's gaze and lets the truth sit there between them. She is not the girl who left Winterfell. Then Catelyn moves, faster than grief. Her bloody hand closes around Arya's arm, fingers biting hard enough to bruise, and she pulls her away from the corpse, away from the high table, toward a narrow side door half hidden behind a tapestry. "Come," she breathes, the word almost lost in the roar. They both know, without speaking, that the king in the north may already be beyond saving. But there are still other lives in this room, other futures clinging to the edge of the night. And if they cannot save a king, perhaps together they can still save a pack. They run for the door, for the thin promise of a passage beyond it, as the hall behind them drowns in steel and song. The doorway is a narrow mercy. It does not care who wears a crown and who does not. It only cares who reaches it first. Steel and song crash behind them. The air in the passage is close, thick with smoke and the iron taste of spilled oaths. Arya stumbles once, catches herself on rough stone, and in that heartbeat another question claws its way up through the darkness. What if Robb is still fighting? What if the king in the north is not yet only a story men will tell in low rooms for the rest of the winter? There are, in truth, 2 paths that open here, the way a man might see 2 roads in a snowstorm and know he cannot walk both. In one, Robb Stark dies as he did in the songs that will be written, suddenly and almost helplessly, an animal brought down in a pen. In the other, he carves his way out, marked and bleeding, a king who has seen the inside of betrayal and lived long enough to understand its particular cost. This timeline does not choose quickly. It hesitates, the way important words sometimes sit on a man's tongue before he lets them fall. In the hall, Robb has already been hit once. The first quarrel punched through the meat of his shoulder when the musicians reached for crossbows instead of strings. Now his sword arm is heavy, his doublet dark with spreading fire. He does not fall. Not yet. He fights back to back with men who still call him Your Grace, as if the word itself might turn blades aside. Small John's roar, blackfish steel, the last hard ring of northern iron against Frey treachery. For a moment, he is only a tall young man in a room gone mad, turning and turning, cutting a path toward the dais where his mother vanished. Then another bolt hammers into his ribs. The world narrows, sound becomes a shadowed tunnel. He sees her. Catelyn, wild-eyed near the side door, Arya half hidden behind her like a child in a half-remembered dream. His face changes, not with surprise, but with the quiet understanding of a man who has finally counted the full price of his own choices. He moves toward them. Of course he does. The last rush is clumsy and stubborn, and entirely him. A Frey spear catches his thigh. A Bolton man, grey, expressionless, the way a man might look when cutting meat, drives steel up under his ribs. Robb's sword slips from his hand. He sinks to his knees, still reaching. Catelyn makes a sound that is not a word. Arya does not. because there is nothing in her that knows how to name this. Men loyal to the wolf close around them. One hauls Catelyn back, another seizes Arya's arm so hard it will bruise. She twists, desperate, the choice tearing her in two. Run to him, or run because he is already lost. Catelyn's fingers clamp around her wrist with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Except her hand shakes, and there is blood on her sleeve. They drag themselves toward the river door as Robb Stark, king in the north, bleeds out on Frey rushes. When the hall finally stills, the air is thick with smoke and the low moans of the dying. Frey men stamp through the bodies, shouting orders, kicking aside broken cups and broken vows. Somewhere in that ruin lies a dead king. Or so the Freys will tell themselves, as word rides out into the night. Because the twins have claimed a crown, but in the dark, beyond their torches, something else has slipped their net, and the North has not yet decided what kind of ghost it wants to follow. Outside the hall, the night feels wrong. The air is cold and wet, a thin rain drifting down from a sky without stars, and it strikes Arya's face like a rebuke after the thick, smoky heat of the feast. The door behind them slams, a heavy, final sound, and for a heartbeat no one moves. Then the world tilts back into motion, the way a man remembers to breathe only after he is nearly drowned. They are fewer than they should be. That is the first clear understanding that settles in her bones. Catelyn is there, hair loose, gown torn, one sleeve soaked dark, where a cut along her arm has already begun to stiffen. The Blackfish has blood on his cheek that is not his own. Sword in hand, eyes moving, with the quiet, ruthless calculation of a man who has led men through worse fields than this. 3 of Robb's bannermen cling close, one dragging a leg that leaves a smear on the stones, another pressing a hand to his side as if holding himself together by choice alone. Robb himself leans on a man whose name Arya does not know. His face is pale, his breath shallow, his doublet darker over the ribs where a quarrel found him in the confusion. He does not look like a king. He looks like a boy who has been asked to pay too much, too quickly. Arrows hiss from the battlements, a thin, vicious music. One clatters from the wall above her head, showering her with grit. Another finds the wounded bannerman's shoulder. He stumbles, curses softly and keeps moving. No one wastes a word on comfort. There is no room for it. Not the main bridge, the Blackfish says, low, already turning. Side gate, down to the water. He speaks of water as if it is the only ally they have left. The stair they find is narrow and unfamiliar, cut into the side of the tower, slick with rain and old moss. The river below is a strip of moving darkness, black and swift, whispering against its own banks. Arya goes first for a few steps, then falls back at Catelyn's sharp command, then edges forward again when the path twists. She sees it before the others do, a gap in the line of Frey archers above, where a torch has guttered out, leaving a pocket of shadow between 2 merlons. There, she says, her voice smaller than she intends, but steady. Run under that, they can't see as well. No one asks how she knows, no one has time. They simply angle their bodies, trusting a girl who once watched the yard at Winterfell from the high windows and learned the way important words and movements travel through space when men think no one is looking. On the bridge to the side gate, the cost comes due. A shout from above, the sudden flare of another torch, and then bolts rain down in earnest. One streaks toward Catelyn, bright and sure. A bannerman with a grey direwolf on his torn cloak moves without thinking, the way a man might reach for a falling cup. He steps into its path with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. The bolt takes him full in the chest. He folds without a sound. Arya's hand is on his sleeve for an instant, fingers closing on empty cloth as he goes down. She does not know his name either. She will remember his face. Move, Catelyn says, raw, and this time Arya does not argue. At the foot of the stair, a patrol rounds the corner, Frey colours blurred by the rain. For a terrible second they see one another clearly. Arya feels the world narrow to the width of that passage, to the scrape of boots, to the river's murmur beyond. Back, she breathes, already pulling at Robb's arm, already dragging him into the deeper shadow of an overhang. Stay still. He does not question her. None of them do. They press themselves against cold stone, becoming shapes instead of people, learning in an instant the lesson she has carried since King's Landing, that survival is sometimes only a matter of whether another man's eye chooses to slide past you. The patrol hurries on, horns blaring, their shouts thrown out toward the main bridge where the slaughter still rages. The sound echoes across the water, thin and cruel. There is no more time. For some, the choice is simple. The Blackfish takes the wounded who can still ride and forces open a postern, where a handful of horses stand tethered, forgotten in the chaos. They mount with grim efficiency, stealing saddles and lives in the same breath, and vanish into the rain, hooves striking sparks from the stones before the darkness swallows them. For the rest, there is only the river. Catelyn's fingers close around Arya's wrist, hard enough to bruise. Robb's weight leans against her other side. The twins loom above them, towers lit like watching eyes that have just blinked blood. Now, Catelyn says. They plunge together into the black water, into cold that feels like the first true touch of winter, and the river takes them, dragging them out from under the Frey's lights and into a darkness where no one, not yet, knows which stark fragments have slipped the noose. What kind of ghost will rise from a river like that? We are not done asking. What if the river's darkness does not end at the riverbank? What if the black water that takes Arya and Catelyn also sends a different kind of tide rolling south, all the way to the red stone of the Red Keep? In King's Landing, the first raven reaches Tywin Lannister at dusk. The room is quiet, the air heavy with the faint, stale scent of extinguished fire. He breaks the seal with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, not because he fears the parchment, but because he understands the way important words can shift the ground beneath his feet. The report is muddled. The king in the north is dead, or missing, or both, depending on which frightened Frey scribe held the quill. Heavy casualties among Lord Walder's sons, confusion in the hall, steel drawn on guests, and in answer a fierce northern resistance that did not die on cue. There is mention of a woman's scream, of wolves, of men fighting on tables slick with wine and blood. Tywin reads it twice. He does not show surprise. His face is an old fortress, and no new crack appears. Yet the shadow that passes through his understanding is real. His design had been clear. A clean, one-sided slaughter that would cut the head from the Northern War and leave only scattered, leaderless fragments, too broken to threaten Lannister rule again. Instead, he has this. A victory, yes, but a noisy one, jagged at the edges. Survivors, witnesses, crossbowmen who panicked. Frey men who died where only wolves were meant to fall. The way a man remembers such a night is not as a quiet settling of debts, but as chaos, as treachery half botched. He speaks of it to no one at first. He sits with the map spread before him, candles guttering low, the rivers and roads of the Trident drawn in careful ink. Guessed right, he thinks, that old northern superstition he has always treated as another tool. Broken cleanly under his terms, it could be framed as necessary, as the harsh wisdom of winter brought south. Broken noisily, with too many singers left alive to see the butchery, it becomes something else. Songs will come from this, he knows. Not the songs he would choose. The phrase will be named Oathbreakers, but the singers will not stop at the twins. They will follow the gold. So he weighs his choices. Does he double down? Bind House Frey and House Bolton tighter? Make their infamy a shield around his grandson's throne? Or does he draw a little distance in public words, let the court speak of overzealous bannermen while he quietly sends more coin, more steel, to hold the crossings? What if a Stark has slipped the noose and will not stop moving in the dark? His fingers come to rest on the painted bridge of the twins. He does not yet know the face of the small girl who stepped through those gates an hour early, but he feels the cost of her choice like a hairline crack in his perfect plan. Winter belongs to those who can control the story. For the first time in this war, Tywin is not certain he can. Word moves faster than ravens when men are afraid. It begins as a broken thing. A groom with his arm in a bloody sling riding hard for Seaguard. A Frey-serving girl who slips away at dawn and takes the river road north. 3 wounded archers who should have died at the Twins but did not, limping back to their village with crossbow bolts still in their flesh. They do not carry banners. They carry description. They speak of music turning to murder, of Frey men reaching for steel beneath the painted rafters, of wolves in a slaughterhouse who bit back when the knives came out. In the smoky rooms of river inns, small folk who poured wine at Lord Walder's board, whisper of a young girl's scream cutting through the first notes, of the king in the north overturning a table, of blood on the rushes that was not all northern. The way important words travel now is not in Meister's ink, but over low tavern benches, from one tired mouth to another. Guestright, oathbreaker, kinslayer. Each word is turned over with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, as if saying it too loudly might crack the world further. In White Harbour, Lord Manderley listens to the first confused raven, and then to the second, which does not match the first. He does not smile, but something in him loosens, a quiet, dangerous relief that the phrase perfidy is no longer a northern rumour, but a Riverland certainty. In his halls, men begin to repeat the story with small telling additions, that Robb Stark rose with sword in hand, that some of his wolves escaped the trap, that Frey treachery was seen and named. Far to the east, the Karstark men are less united. Around thin fires, they argue in low, bitter voices about the cost of Robb's choices. Was it his breaking of a promise that brought the storm to the Twins, or was this darkness always coming, whatever bride he took? A father who lost both sons at the Green Fork says the king should have seen it. A younger man, jaw tight, asks what man could foresee a host slaughtered under Guestright. The Septons in the south speak of sin and sacrilege, of the stranger walking openly in the Frey hall. In the Godswoods, old men with weirwood faces close their eyes and feel the shadow of it in the roots. Guestright is not a law, one argues. It is the fire in the centre of the room. Once someone spits in that fire, how many houses will ever warm their hands at it again? This is the problem Tywin Lannister cannot quite solve. He speaks of victory, of a rebellion ended by sharp steel and sharper wit. But the story that reaches market squares and holdfasts is not a clean tale of battle. It is a story of bread and salt, of murdered men whose blood seeped into Freystone, of a line crossed that cannot be uncrossed. In the Dreadfort, Rose Bolton listens as carefully as any Septon. He does not rush to claim credit. Publicly, he lets the phrase bear the weight of the curse, writing cool, measured letters that suggest he was trapped in the chaos, forced to choose survival over honour. Privately, he counts his spears, eyes Winterfell's empty towers, and considers how the way a man survives such a night might be turned into a justification later. Something in Jon's chest moves when the first of these twisted reports reaches him. Half a world of distance and a heartbeat of understanding away. The north is not broken cleanly here. It is not a single sword cut that severs head from body. It is a region waking in pain, every village and house remembering the feel of a knife at the throat. What if a rebellion does not die when its king is wounded, but when its people forget why they bled? In this timeline, they do not forget. They have seen what was done at the Twins. They repeat it in the dark, around their own fires, until the words themselves begin to feel like a kind of vow. And as those words harden, in one cold hall, a man with flayed men on his banners decides that if the North will not break, he may have to teach it a different kind of fear altogether. The first quiet after the Twins is not truly quiet at all. It only feels that way because the music has stopped. Smoke crawls along the rafters of a half-collapsed barn, catching in the throats of men who have already coughed up blood. A small fire burns low in a ring of broken stones, throwing just enough light to make faces into masks and shadows into watching things. Arya sits close enough to feel the heat on her skin, far enough that no one has yet told her to sleep. Her hands are still stained. The blood has dried in the lines of her fingers, a dark map of every place she gripped too hard. Steel, cloth, a man's wrist as he tried to twist away. She does not scrub at it. She only turns her palms toward the fire and watches the colour deepen as if the flames are drawing it out of her, not burning it away. Around her the adults argue in low, fraying voices. One speaks of riding for River Run, another of scattering to the north and waiting for winter to finish what the phrase began. Names move through the smoke. Karstark, Umber, Bolton, Frey. The way important words move in a room when no one is certain which of them will still matter by morning. Arya hears them, but the sounds come from far away. Closer are other sounds that are not here at all. Crossbows, losing under a song. Her mother's voice, sharp as a knife, calling for Robb. The wet choke of the first man she killed tonight. A Frey guard who thought a small girl on a servant's stairway could be brushed aside with the back of his hand. She had driven the blade up, the way a man in the Brotherhood once showed her, quick and mean, under the ribs. He had fallen against her, heavy and surprised, after there had been more. A throat in the dark, a hand that reached for a sword and never found it. She does not know even now if that first warning shout reached Robb in time, or if it only changed the shape of his dying. She knows her mother is alive because Catelyn's orders still cut through the barn like arrows, binding wounds, naming men, refusing to yield to the darkness pressing in at the doors. She knows her brother is hurt, or nearly hurt, or almost lost, because every time someone glances toward the far corner where he lies, they look away too quickly. Her list has always been a night's work, a whispered prayer to a cruel god of her own making. Now it feels different. Walder Frey is not just a name. He is a face at the high table, jowls trembling with false laughter. Rose Bolton is not just a banner. He is the cold, measuring glance she caught across the hall before the arrows flew. She adds them again in her head, as if saying them twice will carve them deeper. But there are other names she no longer needs to speak. A guard on the east wall, a man with a red feather in his cap who laughed when the doors were barred. She has crossed them off herself. There is a weight in that, a new understanding of what it means when someone stops being a word and becomes a body cooling on the floor. What if she stays? The thought comes with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Though she is no man and nothing around her is gentle. Here by this fire, she is not a lost child on the road. She is the girl who saw the treachery first, who put steel in Frey flesh, who might become a story the North tells itself when it speaks of vengeance. Yet another thought moves beside it. What if she leaves? What if her place is not at Robb's side or under her mother's watchful eye, but in the long shadows of the twins, in every alley and passage, where a Frey might one day walk alone? A Stark among wolves, or a ghost among enemies. She stares into the coals until they blur, until the barn falls away and she is back in the hall. The candles bright, the meat steaming, the first notes of that song curling through the air. The Rains of Castamere threads itself through her memory, thin and sharp as wire. She hears it now where no music plays, and she understands that the song is not finished. Not for her. Not yet. Somewhere beyond the barn, a horse screams once and then is silent. Arya does not flinch. She only leans closer to the fire, as if she might read in its shifting heart whether she is meant to wear her father's name openly in the North's next war, or vanish into the darkness and haunt the Freys until even their grandchildren jump at shadows. What if the king in the North does not die in the Hall of the Twins, but in a forgotten tower room miles away, one slow, shuddering breath at a time? What if the crossbow bolts and treacherous blades find him, yet somehow fail to finish their work? The room they find is not truly a room at all, only the upper floor of a ruined holdfast, its roof half fallen, its stone blackened by some old fire. Robb Stark lies there on a pallet of cloaks, chest bandaged tight, the linen already gone rusty where the bolts went in. Fever beads his brow. His hair is dark with sweat. Still, he has dragged himself upright against the wall, a crude map spread over his knees, the way a man insists on standing for his own execution. Around him, the remnants of a war council try to look like more than they are. A maester without a chain, 2 grizzled captains, a terrified riverlord who has lost half his men and most of his courage. They speak of crossings and supply lines, of which houses might still answer a Stark word. But the talk has the thin, unreal quality of men arguing about shadows on a wall. Robb hears little of it. In his head, the feast plays again and again, each detail sharper than the last. The bread and salt, the way important words were spoken too easily. Walder Frey's mouth twisting around the word guest as if it were a jest. He had trusted the old forms, trusted the idea that some things were too sacred to break. He had trusted his own need to believe that. Was the cost written the moment he broke his Frey betrothal, or the moment he dismissed Arya's warning as a frightened girl's nightmare? Arya stands at his shoulder now, not seated among the ladies, not sent away when the talk turns dark. Her face is streaked with road dust and someone else's blood. She does not fidget. She watches. When one of the captains suggests riding for White Harbour, Robb's gaze flicks first to her, as if to test the air before stepping into it. "What do you see?" he asks, and the room stills at the strangeness of a king asking that of a girl so small. She answers with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. She speaks of banners that shifted too quickly at the twins, of servants who would not meet her eyes, of the quiet that comes before a killing, the way a dog smells it. Robb listens. He does not smile at the thought of Arya as some wild little seer. He only nods, as if finally granting weight to instincts he had once brushed aside. Yet the new understanding comes at a cost. When she asks to ride with the scouts, to slip back toward the Green Fork and cut a Frey's throat in the night, he refuses, and the refusal lands between them like a drawn blade. He hears the steel in her voice when she says she has killed before. He is horrified by how easily she speaks of it. She is horrified that he still thinks of her as someone to be kept whole. In the pauses between arguments, winter memories try to rise, snowball fights in the courtyard, needles of ice on the Godswood pond, her chasing him with a wooden sword while Bran laughed. Those shadows do not quite fit over the girl beside him now, and he does not know how to bridge the distance. When at last the others are sent away, when the fire has burned low and the darkness presses close, he reaches for her hand. His voice is rough, the words coming slowly, as if each has to be dragged through pain. "They will pay," he says. "The Freys, the Boltons, all of them. The North will not kneel while I still draw breath, even if this crown is thorns now, not bronze." Arya studies him in the flickering light, as if weighing whether such a promise can live in a body so broken. Somewhere beyond the ruined wall, an owl calls once and is silent, and the night seems to lean in, listening for whether the wounded king means every word. Morning does not come as a colour so much as a thinning of the darkness above the ruined camp, a grey that shows more bodies than it hides. The fire by Robb's litter has burned low, his breath has grown shallow, each one a quiet argument with the night. They hear it before they see it. A horn from the twins, thin and reedy, then a ragged cheer that does not sound like victory so much as mockery, carried on cold air. Arya is on her feet first, hand on the knife at her belt, the way a man might reach for a familiar prayer. Catelyn only looks toward the bridge, her face unreadable, as if she has already walked into this moment in her thoughts and found no door out of it. The rider comes stumbling rather than riding, a Frey horse under a Stark man, cloak soaked dark at the shoulder. He does not dismount with the care of a man placing something fragile on a table. He falls, catches himself on one knee, forces the words out because he understands the cost of silence. He speaks of a wolf's head sewn to a king's body, of Frey men laughing beneath their own grey banners, of crossbows raised in the hall while the musicians played. Robb Stark dies there, in the telling, before his mother can reach for his hand or his sister can lean close enough to feel the last of his warmth. Catelyn does not scream. She does not claw at her face. Her grief comes inwards, like winter wind forced through a crack in stone. When she closes her eyes, it is not to escape the word dead, but to place it somewhere she can use it. Arya watches her, waiting for madness and finding something colder instead. There is a stillness in her mother now that feels more dangerous than any shout. When Catelyn finally speaks, her voice is level, almost quiet. The way important words sometimes are. Names. First, Frey, Bolton, Lannister, then tasks, who can still ride, which banners still answer, where the woods are thickest and the roads most narrow. What if the North must learn to live without a crowned wolf? What if its power becomes something that moves under branches and behind hedgerows instead of beneath carved stone? The resistance takes shape not in a great hall but in a copse of trees by a dying fire. Small bands at first, Karstark men who could not stomach their lord's end, Blackwood archers who know every bend of the Red Fork, riverfolk who have seen too many cages passing east toward the Dreadfort. They slip through the Frey's fingers like smoke, cutting down patrols on moonless nights, burning wagons of grain meant for the twins, dragging half-starved prisoners from chains before Bolton men can drive them north. Arya becomes their shadow on the road. She goes ahead alone into villages that still pretend at normal days, listening in the low rooms of inns where Frey soldiers drink too much and trust too easily to their new power. She learns the weight of a quiet step on rotten boards, the angle at which a knife must enter under a jaw to keep a man from crying out. She does not have Bravos yet, or a many-faced god, but she has a list, and the first true understanding that she can shorten it with her own hand. Sometimes she returns with only words. Which bridge is watched, which ford is clear. Sometimes she returns with blood drying on her cuffs and eyes that do not quite meet her mother's. Catelyn says nothing, because she knows the choice was made the moment the Freys broke bread and guessed right together, and then broke it again with steel. Their banner is a tattered scrap of direwolf cloth, smoke-stained and torn, carried wrapped around a spear more often than flown. It is enough. Frey men begin to glance at the tree line when the wind rises, to startle at the crack of a branch, to whisper of a dead king's mother and a ghost girl with a knife who moves through the winter woods like a rumour. And in one such wood, beneath branches heavy with frost, Catelyn and Arya stand together over a map scratched into frozen earth, planning a strike that will reach far beyond the twins, toward a name neither of them has spoken aloud yet, but will. When we come back to the twins, it is not to music. Months have passed, yet the air around the towers feels as if it has frozen on the night of the feast and never quite thawed. The bridge is the same grey stone, the same narrow throat over the river, but the way men move upon it has changed. There are more spears, more hard eyes, fewer laughter-softened faces. Travellers still need to cross. They come with carts and cloaks and quiet words about the cost of taking the longer road, yet they pause at the sight of doubled guards on the walls, at murder holes freshly cleared, at banners that hang heavy as if they remember. Some turn away. Those who do not are searched with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Except here the fragile thing is Walder Frey's sense of safety, and it is already cracked. Inside, the great hall is colder. Fires burn, but they do not seem to warm the room. Walder sits in his carved chair and snaps at servants, at sons, at the thin, frightened grandchildren who hover near his elbow. He hears too much. Rumours seep through stone the way winter wind finds every gap. A patrol cut down near Fairmarket. A supply train vanished on the Green Fork. A Frey cousin strung from an oak with a wolf's head painted in ash above him. He does not say Arya's name. He speaks of that woman. When word comes of Catelyn seen in the Riverlands, veiled and hard-eyed, trading bread and justice in equal measure. But it is the girl who troubles his sleep. Stories reach the twins of a small figure in a dark cloak, of a girl with a wolf's face, glimpsed just before the fire arrows fall, just before horses scream, and Frey men do not come home. The songs are worse. They are quiet things, half remembered in the kitchens, hummed under breath in the stables, carried by peddlers who pretend not to understand the words. A coward lord who broke guest right and still lost sons. A bridge that cannot keep out the dead. The way important words like oath and bread and salt twist in those verses makes even hardened phrase shift in their seats. Retaliation is the only language Walder trusts. His riders scour the riverlands, dragging small folk from their beds at the slightest whisper of Stark favour. Villages that once paid toll in grain now pay in blood. A miller's boy hanged because his sister wore a direwolf stitched in clumsy thread. A sept burned because someone swore they saw a girl praying there with a sword at her hip. Each act is meant to stamp out fear. Instead it feeds it, and hatred grows like a shadow at dusk. Among the Freys themselves, Arya has already slipped into something larger than a single child. Some call her a ghost, the little wolf, who walks through walls and drinks spilled wine from the rushes. Others, more fearful, whisper that she is a witch, that the darkness in the halls that night took root in her and learned to walk. A few remember a ragged girl in the kitchens, the way a man remembers a knife he once set aside and now cannot find. One evening, as the river runs black under a moonless sky, a grandson comes shaking to Walder's chair with another report of a missing patrol. The old man's hand slams the armrest. "Double the night watch," he snaps, voice sharp enough to cut the quiet. "She'll come. The little wolf will come for us one day." He leans closer, eyes gone to shadow. "If I'd known," he mutters, almost to himself, "I'd have killed every child in wolf colours that night." The boy flinches, and somewhere beyond the walls, in the dark, the Freys have made for themselves. A different kind of watch is already being kept. Sibok, what if the girl, who stands in that dark, reeking yard outside the Twins, never has to watch a wolf banner burn alone? In the canon we know, Arya's road bends toward emptiness. The hound drags her from the gate, her father long dead, her mother and brother gone in a storm of crossbow bolts and music. By the time she stands on that Braavosi deck with the iron coin in her palm, she is a child, cut loose from every room and every word that once named her. No father, no pack, no home to go back to. She is, for the first time, someone the House of Black and White can plausibly strip down to nothing. The coin Jaqen gave her at Harrenhal is not, in that world, a plan. It is a strange token, a story half believed, something she fingers at night the way a man might thumb a half-healed scar. Only when the hound falls, only when Westeros itself feels like a grave she has been buried in alive, does Braavos become an answer. She does not run toward the faceless men, so much as away from everything else. Here, the cost changes. In this altered winter she reaches the Twins early, and the slaughter never quite happens the way it should. Robb lives, or Catelyn does, or both cling on, bloodied but breathing. The North still has a king, or at least a living heart. Arya is not a rootless shadow slipping between wars. She is a Stark seen and claimed, a little wolf with a place at a Northern Council fire. What does it mean to ask such a girl to become no one? What does it mean to tell her that her name is a mask to be set aside, when her brother speaks of that name with the full weight a Stark gives to words? One path runs east regardless. Robb, who has seen the way her eyes go flat when Frey is spoken of, might look at his sister and understand, with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, that the darkness in her will not be prayed away. Catelyn, remembering a red hall and almost widowhood, might whisper of a different kind of wardship. Send her across the narrow sea, let the faceless men hone what the war has already woken. Let Arya return as a weapon that can slip through any gate, a quiet answer to men like Walder Frey and Rose Bolton. Or Arya herself remembers Jaqen's promise the way important words lodge in bone. A girl need only speak the name of Braavos, a girl who has watched one betrayal narrowly averted, might still dream of preventing the next, not as a lady in a northern keep, but as a ghost who can walk unmarked through any feast. Yet another road keeps her west. The Brotherhood without banners still prowl broken riverlands. The Hound still moves through the world, brutal and oddly honest. In this version, she learns by watching the way a man like Sandor kills without flinching and lives with the cost anyway. She trains her hands with outlaws and loyal men both, building a craft not sanctified by any foreign god, but by the cold arithmetic of northern justice. No coin, no temple, only a girl who never leaves her name behind, turning the forests and snows of the north into her own house of black and white. Which version of Arya is more dangerous to her enemies, the one who surrenders herself to distant shadows, or the one who stays and teaches winter itself to remember every debt? The answer will decide not only who dies, but what kind of north survives them. In the Dreadfort's highest room, winter presses at the arrow slits, and Rose Bolton reads in a quiet that is almost devotional. One raven speaks of victory at the Twins. Another, arriving a day later with torn feathers and a broken seal, speaks of fire in the night, of Frey dead piled like cordwood, of a wolf banner glimpsed and then gone again into the darkness. He does not frown. Rose is not a man who wastes his face on feeling. Instead, he reads each conflicting word with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, weighing not the ink, but the cost hidden inside it. Higher Frey losses than promised, Stark men unaccounted for, small folk along the Green Fork whispering of guest right broken, and wolves that bite back. The way important words begin to change, shape in the mouths of common men, matters more to him than any single skirmish. On parchment, his position remains strong. Tywin Lannister's letters still speak of gratitude and gold. The title Warden of the North still hangs before him like something already half-earned. Yet when he closes his eyes, Rose can see the path to Winterfell narrowing, each step edged with shadow. What is a title worth if half the houses you mean to rule are already choosing, quietly, to resist? He thinks of the Umbers, the Manderleys, the mountain clans who never loved him and never pretended to. In the original design, the Red Wedding breaks their spine in a single night. Now the break is incomplete, a jagged fracture instead of a clean cut. What if every raid, every burned supply cart gives them a story of righteous vengeance to gather around? Ramsay is another kind of calculation. The bastard moves through the north like a small private storm. Flayed men on trees, smoking ruins where stubborn villages once stood. Once, Rose imagined leaning into that terror, letting Ramsay's cruelty do the work of 1,000 sworn swords. Now he studies the reports and understands the danger in the shape of his own son. The more overt the brutality, the clearer the choice for those who still name themselves Stark men. Serve the Flayer or the Wolves. The Wolves have learned new tricks. Somewhere between the neck and the white knife, Dreadfort men vanish on night roads. Supply wagons meant for the south are found overturned, horses cut loose, drivers bound but left alive to talk. Once, a patrol rides back with their own flayed man banner hacked to ribbons, a crude direwolf's head carved into the cloth as if by a child with a dagger and too much patience. He speaks of this to no one. But in the privacy of his thoughts, Rose turns again to the reports from the twins. A girl seen in the chaos. Small, skinny, hard to catch. A girl who slipped from the Frey's grip and left a hall full of dead men behind her. The way a man ignores a nameless scrap at the edge of the room can become, in time, the hinge on which his fortunes turn. Arya Stark, a name that should have been buried with her mother, now moving through his careful plans like a thin, sharp blade aimed at the softest place. What happens when every raven he sends north must account for a ghost he cannot see, a child he cannot find, and a north that may already be listening for her footsteps? So the north begins to listen for Arya Stark like a rumour in the dark, a small sharp presence cutting through Frey stone and Lannister gold. Far to the south, another Stark girl listens too, but from a different kind of prison. In King's Landing, or later in the high thin rooms of the Eyrie, Sansa's world is made of silk and stone and watchful eyes. The corridors smell of incense and cold rushes, not horse and river mud. Her days are measured in courtesies, in the way important words must be folded and refolded before they are allowed to leave her mouth. She smiles when she is meant to smile, sits when she is told to sit, and survival becomes a matter of knowing precisely how much of herself to hide. She thinks of Robb sometimes, riding south with banners like a red and grey fire against the winter sky. She imagines him breaking through a castle gate, sword in hand, the way a man in a song always arrives at the last possible moment. She imagines Arya too, but never as the small hungry creature moving through the riverlands. In Sansa's mind, Arya is still a wild shadow with a wooden sword, appearing suddenly in some torchlit room to cut her chains and laugh in that unladylike way. What if she knew that, even as she rehearses these rescues in silence, Arya is already standing in real halls among real knives? What if she understood that her sister's hands are no longer clean, that the stories have turned on themselves? Sansa learns a different craft. She watches men like Littlefinger, like Tyrion, like the Queen, and she studies the way a man can kill with nothing but a soft word at the right time. She learns to wear a face the way other people wear cloaks, to let her true thoughts move behind her eyes like fish in deep water. He does not teach her openly this city, but every slight, every threat is a lesson in how to live inside a gilded cage without letting it close around her throat. Arya, in the Riverlands, is learning another game entirely. She moves from tree line to ditch, from barn to broken inn, a thin figure in leather and stolen wool. Her teachers are the Hound's rough pragmatism, the Brotherhood's restless fire, the chill understanding that no one is coming to save her. Where Sansa plays with words and glances, Arya plays with knives and shadows. And then the pattern breaks. The first whispers reach Sansa as half-heard gossip at a feast, carried on the uneasy laughter of men who have drunk too much. A wedding at the Twins, they say, where the music changed and the meat turned to blood. Some speak of guest right broken, of fray treachery, of a battle in a feast hall. One man, lower born and less careful, mentions a Stark girl seen among the survivors, running like a ghost through the smoke. The room tilts very slightly. Sansa keeps her face smooth, her hands folded with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Inside, everything is moving. In the true history, news of the Red Wedding is a blade driven straight through what remains of her hope. Here the story comes bent, uncertain, full of shadows. Robb dead, perhaps. Robb missing, perhaps. Catelyn fallen into the river or not, a daughter of Winterfell seen at the edge of the slaughter. Is it Arya? Is it some other girl wearing a wolf on her cloak? Sansa cannot know, but the idea that Arya might have been there, might have changed something, becomes a quiet fire she tends in secret. She lies awake in her southern bed, listening to the wind press at the shutters, and imagines two paths running side by side, one lined with marble and candles, one with mud and broken steel. On both, a Stark girl walks forward, learning how to live in a world that has already tried to erase her. One in silk, one in leather, one learning the cost of every spoken word, one counting the cost in bodies left behind. Arya's earlier step into the Twins does not reach Sansa as a clear report. It reaches her as possibility, as refusal, as proof that the North is not yet finished. In her mind, more of her family is still alive than the world believes. And somewhere, in the riverlands that haunt every southern map, a sister she has not seen since King's Landing may already be cutting a path back toward her. What if, on that long, dark road north of the Green Fork, the next set of riders Arya meets are not fray men or broken northerners, but the same outlaws who once hung men for raiding peasants' fields? The riverlands around her are quieter now, but it is the wrong kind of quiet, the hush that follows a great crime. Smoke on the horizon, burned farms, the sour memory of music turned to murder. When the scouts ride back to her small, Stark-aligned band and speak the name Beric Dondarrion, something in Arya's chest moves, a faint echo of a fire-lit cave, and a boy at an anvil who chose another family. They meet in a ruined sept, roof half fallen, the air thick with old incense and new damp. The Brotherhood without banners are thinner than she remembers, more shadow than company, their faces carved by the cost of too many small wars. Thoros' hair is greyer, Beric's voice quieter, as if each resurrection has taken some of the sound from him. He does not rush to her. He studies the direwolf on her surcoat with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. Names pass between them like careful coin. Frey, Lannister, Bolton, Stark. The way important words move in this room is different now. Each carries the weight of a slaughter they all failed to stop. Beric speaks of riverfolk butchered for sheltering Robb's men, of guest right spat upon, of the Lord of Light's fire showing him no easy path. Arya, in turn, speaks of the twins as she saw them from the inside, of crossbows under song, of a mother's last scream. On the surface, their purposes seem to run side by side. Both want Frey blood answered, Lannister power checked, Bolton treachery dragged into the open. Yet under the words, a quieter argument waits. The Brotherhood fight, or say they fight, for the small folk first, for the right of a farmer to keep his grain, of a miller's daughter to walk home before winter without fear. Arya rides for a house and a region, for banners and names, for a father's honour and a brother's crown that now only exist in memory. Where does one cause end and the other begin? In that ruined sept, she remembers Gendry's stubborn refusal to be a lord, remembers the way a man like Lem spoke of kings as if they were distant storms rather than suns. She also remembers the twins' hall, and how quickly the world can end when a lord decides the small folk do not matter at all. So the alliance they shape is practical, uneasy, threaded through with this understanding. The Brotherhood know hidden fords and forgotten deer tracks. They guide Stark raiders through the tangle of the Trident's branches, slipping between Frey patrols the way water finds cracks in stone. A village that once feared both wolf and flaming heart wakes to find Frey, stores emptied, their banners burned, their worst men hanging from the same trees where innocent boys once swung. Justice, they call it aloud. In the dark, when the fires burn low, some of them wonder if the line to vengeance has already been crossed. What if the single choice of which banner to ride beneath decides which of those words is true? As the months turn, Arya feels the pull of both. The direwolf promises home, blood answered with blood, a northern winter in which her family might stand whole again. The Flaming Heart promises something harsher and larger, a world where no lord, not even a Stark, is allowed to forget the cost paid by the nameless. Between them, she stands very still, understanding that whichever she follows more closely will shape not only her targets, but the kind of person she is allowed to become. And somewhere ahead, another choice waits, one that will not let her keep both. Winterfell falls, in the true history, the way a man might lose a hand and keep moving for a time without understanding yet what has been taken. First to Theon's desperate betrayal, then to Ramsay's fire, and at last to the flayed men banners climbing its blackened walls where the direwolf once ran proud. The castle becomes a quiet wound on the map, a room of stone held open for cruelty. In that darkness, the Boltons' work is simple. Robb's dead, the northern host broken, the great lords scattered or cowed. Rose speaks of order, he speaks of peace. He does not need every man's love, only enough frightened understanding to accept the new sigil above Winterfell and the new rules written in blood. For a long while, no one with Stark blood stands openly against him. Here, Arya's hour at the Twins shifts all of that. The Red Wedding still tears, but it does not land clean. Frey men die in their own halls, throats open by a girl who moves like a shadow between overturned benches. Rose escapes, but not unmarked. Word follows him north that there was a Stark girl alive in the smoke, that she named him traitor before witnesses who fled. The way important words travel, carried by men who wish they had not heard them. What does it mean to claim Winterfell when the North whispers that a wolf is hunting you? Rose sends men to hold the castle all the same, thin garrisons under hard captains, but they ride through villages where small folk remember Arya's defiance at the crossing as keenly as they remember Robb's banners. Each column meets quiet stairs, doors that close too early, woods that seem to swallow scouts, and then sometimes arrows. Guerrilla war is not the northern way in the songs, yet it grows here, slow as ice. Broken umbermen, flinty mandaleys, nameless hill clans, each has seen or heard of the girl who would not die at the Twins, and each reads that story as permission. A burned holdfast becomes an ambush ground. A Bolton supply train vanishes into a white morning. Winterfell, instead of a prize to be simply occupied, turns into a stone heart too costly to hold. The Ironborn still come. Theon still makes his terrible choice, slipping into the castle he once called home, and seizing it with a handful of men. But even that moment bends. News from the south runs ahead of him. Rumours of Frey corpses, of Rose riding hard, of a Stark girl who cuts throats and disappears. Theon's triumph tastes thin. He understands dimly that he has not stolen a living lord's seat so much as stepped into the centre of a storm. Ramsay's burning may still follow, the fire licking up the old timbers, smoke smearing the sky. Or perhaps it is checked, slowed by raiders who harry his march, by northern eyes that mark his every movement. What if his men reach Winterfell to find not an empty shell, but a maze of half-collapsed passages and hidden doors already mapped in a child's memory? Because in this timeline, Arya has more than names. She has directions. She has the tilt of every stair, the loose stone behind the kitchens, the servants' steps that carry sound differently in winter. When she comes north, and she will, drawn by a word as simple and heavy as home, she does not ride to the gate and shout her name. She comes as she came to the Twins, small, unremarked, knife light in her hand. Imagine her slipping through the broken walls, feeling with her fingers the grooves she once traced while chasing cats, counting her steps in the dark. Winterfell becomes a weapon in her grasp, each forgotten corridor a blade she can turn against whoever dares claim her father's seat. A Bolton captain goes missing on his way from hall to barracks. A Frey cousin is found in the Godswood pool, throat open, the weirwood watching. The castle itself changes meaning. In the old story, it is a lost thing to be retaken, a symbol of all that has been burned away. Here it is contested memory. Rose calls it his by royal decree, the Freys mutter of promises, the Ironborn remember smoke and screams. Scattered northerners speak of a girl in the crypt who walks like a ghost. The stones remember too, the echo of a little girl's bare feet as she runs through the halls, the soft panting of a cat just out of reach, the low murmur of Ned Stark's voice in the solar above. Who owns such a place? The man with the paper or the child whose bones know every turning? The question hangs, unresolved, as winter deepens. And somewhere beneath the castle, in air that has never fully lost the chill of the dead, a different door waits for Arya to open it. The stories find her before any raven does. They move faster than horses, faster than the cold wind that comes down from the neck, slipping from campfire to campfire in the riverlands, then riding north in the mouths of men who have seen too much winter already. A little wolf, they say in the half-dark, a girl who walked into the Twins under guest right and walked out with blood on her hands and Frey men at her heels. No one agrees on the details. Everyone agrees on the shiver that runs through the room when her name is spoken. In the north, the tale is simple and clean in the way a man telling it to his sons wishes the world to be simple and clean. Arya Stark saw the treachery first, they say. She slipped among the serving girls, heard the wrong word at the wrong time, and ran to her brother's side with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. She warned the king in the north, and though the cost was blood and fire in the Frey halls, the line of Stark did not end there. He does not mention how close it came. South of the Green Fork, the Freys make different choices with the same bones. In their telling, she is not a sister but a shadow, a cursed witch who soured the meat and turned the wine to darkness. who brought bad luck into a hall that had only ever offered bread and salt in good faith. They speak of her, the way a man speaks of a storm that ruined his harvest, as if she were weather, not answer. The more they insist, the more their own men glance toward the doors at night. Lannister-friendly singers smooth her away almost entirely. A lost child. They shrug. Some nameless girl who happened to be there when great lords decided great matters. They put the weight of the night on Tywin's letters, on Rose Bolton's cold understanding of opportunity, on the way important words written in a careful hand can end a war without any girl ever lifting a dagger. It is tidier that way, less troubling. Arya hears all of it in pieces, caught on the wind. A snatch of song in a village square, a muttered prayer from a man who does not know she is close enough to touch. Embarrassment flares first, hot and sharp, when a singer gives her a wolfskin cloak she never owned, and a speech she never made. Then anger, when they forget the names of the dead and remember only her. And somewhere beneath both, a thin, hollow pride. Her name, she realises, has become a kind of weapon, as sharp as any steel she carries. There is a cost to that weapon. Frey patrols ride with their shoulders tight, horses skittish at shadows that look like small girls. Small folk who might once have barred their doors now leave a crust of bread on a windowsill if a quiet knock comes after dark, and a girl's voice gives a false name that still sounds like the stories. In the Dreadfort, and later in Winterfell under flayed banners, Boltons calculate numbers and rations, and then, reluctantly, morale. How many men will march as firmly if they believe a Stark ghost walks the river fog? How many will hold a gate if they think the next face in the darkness might be hers? One night, she finds herself at the edge of a ragged camp, half strangers and half men who once wore her brother's colours, listening to a boy with a cracked lute sing about the little wolf who outwitted 100 Freys. His voice is thin, the tune wrong. The girl in the song laughs more than she ever did. She dies twice and rises 3 times before the final verse, all fire and no fear. Arya sits very still, hands around a wooden cup gone cold. The words fall over her like snow. She remembers the kitchens of the twins, the grease on her fingers, the weight of the first man she killed, the way his breath stopped against her palm. The distance between that memory and the song feels wider than the trident. When the last chord fades, the camp exhales, comforted by a myth they think they understand. Arya does not join their laughter. She only watches the flames gutter low and realises that the girl in their mouths is already half a stranger to the one who still wakes at every sound, counting exits, measuring shadows. What happens, she wonders, when the legend grows larger than the choices she can bear to make? What if the legend walks alone into a quiet house that thinks the war has already passed it by? The Frey Manor squats on a low rise above the river, a lesser holding strung between the Twins and the Green Fort crossings, important enough for a banner, unimportant enough that its lord has begun to travel with only a modest escort. Stone walls, timbered upper floors, smoke from a central hall. The shape of safety, or what men like to call safety when the great slaughter is happening somewhere else. Arya comes to it at dusk. Mud on her hem, hair tangled, the small deliberate stoop of a peasant girl who has walked too far and learned not to meet a soldier's eye. She speaks of lost kin and empty roads and winter coming on too fast. The words taste thin in her mouth, but she has learned the way important words can be stacked, one atop another, with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, until they make a story people want to believe. They take her in. Of course they do. A servant girl is nothing. A hungry child is less than nothing. In the kitchens, the heat presses close, the room thick with steam and the hiss of fat on iron. She moves as she once moved through the Twins. Quiet, watchful, counting doors and knives and the way shadows pool in corners. Only now there are more years between each breath, more names behind her teeth. She hears him before she sees him. That lamp, coarse and pleased with itself, rolling down the passage from the small hall where he eats apart from his men. A son of Walder or a grandson, it hardly matters. He carries the Frey look like a bruise, the thin mouth, the watery eyes. He had stood near the musicians that night. He had laughed when the first bolts flew. In the darkened corridor outside his solar, the torches burn low, their light a thinned, restless fire against the stone. Arya waits where the servants are not supposed to linger, a jug in her hands, her heart as steady as it ever was in the practice yard. He does not come with guards. Why would he? This is not the Twins. This is the place you go when you think the cost has already been paid. He almost passes her. Almost. Then his gaze snags on her face. Some small recognition stirring. Not of her, but of the shape of northern features he has helped to orphan. His mouth twists. Girl. Who? She steps into his shadow. Quick. Intimate. As if to pour for him. The needle-thin blade slides up beneath his ribs, angled the way a man once showed her in a Bravosi room that smelled of dust and fear. His breath catches on the word he was about to make into an order. Guest, he manages, as if that old broken protection might rise up now between them. She does not answer. She watches his eyes as the understanding comes, as his hand flutters uselessly at her wrist. Arya, he tries, or perhaps it is only air. She leans close enough that her whisper is a winter draught across his ear. Frey. He dies on that, half-formed protests about war and right, and who struck first, curdling unspoken on his tongue. She eases him down, wipes the blade clean on his fine embroidered sleeve, and thinks, not of this house, but of bread and salt borne past her at the Twins, the night the music changed, and all the rooms of her life burned. How many such rooms will she have to walk through before the ledger feels anything like even? The war does not end at the Twins. It curdles there, then seeps outward, slow and poisonous, until even Walder Frey's stone towers feel it in their foundations. By the time Arya comes back to that crossing, the music of the realm has changed again. The Lannisters have bled in the west, their gold road choked by burned wagons and dead men. A northern host has slipped through mist and marsh to cut a Lannister column to pieces, the way a man might slice through rotted cloth with a sharp, unhesitating hand. Rumours move faster than ravens. Talk of wolves who will not die. Talk of Freys found hanging from their own bridge arches, their faces left bare to the winter air. Arya rides in the quiet between such stories. The Twins rise ahead of her, as they did once before, grey against the sky. But she is not the ragged child pressed back by the hound's hand. She sits her horse with a stillness that has nothing of childhood left in it. The towers reflected in her eyes like a room she has already entered in dreams, again and again, until she knows where every shadow falls. There is a plan now, and she is not its only author. The Blackfish has men hidden in the reeds and ruined fishing huts downstream, watching the current for any sign. A band of riverlords, half-starved and wholly stubborn, wait for a gate to open or a bridge to crack. They speak of cost with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. They know what guest right meant. They know what it was made to mean here. Arya's part is smaller and sharper. One gatehouse, one door, one old man at the heart of it all. She does not speak of fear, because there is no room left in her for that word, only for the names she has carried through darkness and snow. Walder Frey sits at the centre of every one of those names. She goes in as they once did, under a banner of full safety, not bread and salt this time, but a cask of Arbor gold and a folded letter bearing a sigil stolen from a dead Frey boy. She wears another face in the loose way only she can now, shoulders rounded, eyes downcast, the way a man might carry a burden he means to set down only once. The hall is smaller than she remembered it, or perhaps she has grown around it. Walder mutters on his high seat, complaining of wolves and wards and the way important words like oath and honour have lost their weight. He does not look at the girl pouring his wine. He does not see the steadiness of her hand. He drinks. He frowns at the taste. He does not understand that the bitterness on his tongue is not in the cup. Later, when the shouting starts at the far gate and one of the bridge towers gives a long, shuddering groan, Arya is already standing close enough to touch him. His guards have run toward the noise. His sons are arguing, thin voices cutting the room to pieces. She leans in as if to hear him better. His breath smells of fear and old meat. Her blade is a small, familiar weight between them. "Do you know me now, my lord?" she asks, quiet as falling ash. He blinks, and for a heartbeat there is something like understanding in his clouded eyes. By the time his blood reaches the stones where northern men once fell, the far tower is collapsing, and the twins themselves are learning what betrayal tastes like. What if the river does not stop there? What if the fall of this one old man is only the first stone in a flood she cannot yet see coming? The river does not stop, it spreads. In the canon we know, the map after the Red Wedding hardens quickly, the way a man's face hardens around an old wound. Boltons in Winterfell, flayed men over northern keeps, Freys draped like a stain across the Green Fork, Lannister lions watching from the south, as if the whole thing were a problem already solved. The north falls quiet. The riverlands burn without answer. Resistance becomes a whisper. Here, the silence never quite takes. News from the twins moves differently when the hall does not finish its work. Men flee into the night with blades wet from Frey blood as well as northern. Some ravens never leave their perches. Others carry confused, halting words. Treachery begun. Treachery repaid, the young wolf wounded but not taken, a girl with a wolf's face seen in the smoke. He does not become a neat story that can be ended in a single sentence. The result is a north that refuses to behave like conquered ground. Bolton riders still try to claim Winterfell in the king's name, but they meet pockets of organised defiance far earlier, small holdfasts that have already heard that the Red Wedding was not clean, that Freys died screaming under falling stone. The way important words travel, guest right, slaughter, Stark, changes the air in every cold room from Deepwood Motte to White Harbour. Rose finds himself fighting on two fronts, against the remnant of the Stark host that slipped the noose at the twins, and against the quiet, enduring hatred of his own people, who now know not only that he betrayed his king, but that the betrayal failed to bring the swift, bloodless victory he had promised. He speaks of order and necessity, but each new levy he calls feels less like duty and more like collaboration in something foul. In the Riverlands, the change is sharper still. Walder Frey's higher dead, and the stories of chaos in his own halls make his bannermen hesitate. Tully holdouts in the woods, and by the smaller streams, understand that the Freys did not win cleanly. They won badly, and perhaps not for long. Small bands begin to move with more coordination, harrying supply lines to the twins, cutting lesser crossings, turning the Green Fork into a chain of small bleeding cuts instead of a single broken neck. What if Riverrun does not have to wait so long for relief? In this timeline, a battered but living Stark Tully force can plausibly turn back toward the Red Castle on the river, or at least send seasoned men to stiffen the guerrillas already there. A siege might still come, but now it comes against a house that has never fully surrendered, whose people have seen the Freys humbled and believe they can be humbled again. South of all this, the Lannisters feel the cost first in their ledgers, then in their bones. To hold the Riverlands for allies who are no longer feared, but merely hated, they must send more gold, more grain, more men, who will not be in King's Landing when the faith begins to remember its own power, or across the narrow sea when a dragon queen looks west. Something in Jon's chest moves later, when he hears that the lions are stretched thin, that their shadow on the map is long but no longer deep. And if we pull back far enough, the pattern reveals itself. The north, on parchment, is still marked as contested or even lost. But it never becomes the great silent expanse of cannon, blue and grey under a flayed man's banner. It looks instead like a bruise that never fully heals, a darkening on the skin of the realm that keeps bleeding Lannister and Frey strength year after year, winter after winter, with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table and discovering it cracks no matter how gently he sets it down. What if the bruise could be seen forming, not only traced after the fact? What if, in that shadowed hall at the Twins, there is a small Stark shape already moving against the darkness before the first note of the song turns false? In canon, Arya's memory of this place is an absence with edges, the gate closing in her face, the rush of men, the glimpse of grey direwolf on Robb's torn banner, of his body desecrated, the wolf's head sewn where a king's face should be. She does not reach him. She does not even reach the yard. The hound's arm comes down like a falling portcullis, and when she wakes, the fire is already out, her brother already gone, the cost already paid. That helplessness becomes a room she never truly leaves. Every time she whispers her list in the dark, she is back at that closed gate, small and useless, naming men she cannot touch. The way important words lodge in a child's throat, too big, too late, becomes the way she understands justice, something always arriving after the slaughter, never before. Here the pattern bends. She walks through the gate before it slams. She smells the spiced wine, the grease of roasted meat, the river damp under the stone. She sees the glances between frays, hears the wrong note in the musician's playing, feels the prickle of danger along her skin the way a man feels a storm in his bones. She warns someone. Perhaps it is a serving girl. Perhaps a guard who still remembers Winterfell's courtesies. Perhaps Catelyn herself. The warning does not save everyone. It saves enough that the story changes. So her trauma is not a clean wound of failure, but a jagged edge of partial success. She knows now that a single word can turn a man's steps aside, that a dagger in the right moment can silence a crossbow before it sings. She has seen an uncle or a bannerman live because she moved, because she chose. She has also watched her brother fall anyway. What does a child do with that kind of arithmetic? The list in this timeline is not a prayer whispered into a void. It is a ledger. Each name is tied to a face in that hall, to the feel of the rushes under her feet, to the song breaking off midway, to the metallic sweetness of blood under the smell of wine. She speaks of Walder Frey and hears the scraping of his voice over the promise of guest right. She speaks of Rose Bolton and sees the quiet measuring eyes that had already chosen another winter. This Arya does not run from other people's suffering into pure detachment. She has proof that intervention is not a fantasy. She has watched the river of events split around a single small stone. When she reaches Braavos, the House of Black and White's cold doctrine of indifference sits differently in her. She understands its power. She also understands its cost. He does not know it, this kindly man of many faces, but every time he asks her to be no one, she is back in that room at the Twins, counting the ones she did save. She is softer in one sense, softer toward the living, less willing to walk past a beaten girl in an alley or a servant trembling under a lord's hand, because she has seen how one warning, one knife, can change the shape of a night. And she is harder in another, harder in the cold, methodical part of her that will do whatever is required to ensure there is never another Twins for her family. Never another feast that turns to slaughter while she stands on the wrong side of a door. What if that resolve, born not of pure loss but of altered fate, becomes the true north of her life? What happens when a girl who has already changed one massacre walks toward the next great turning of the realm, carrying that understanding like a hidden blade? That hidden blade begins with something far less sharp. A horse turned down a different road, the hound cursing at the depth of a ford, Arya's thin voice insisting they press on through the dusk instead of waiting for morning. What if the single decision that seems so small becomes the hinge upon which everything else turns? The river is only a river. Mud, stones, cold water up to a warhorse's chest. Yet the way a man chooses where to cross it can redraw the map of a kingdom. In one life, Sandor Clegane judges the current wrong. They lose time, and Arya reaches the twins just in time to smell the smoke of her brother's burning body. In this life, he reads the water better, or simply grows impatient with delay, and they arrive early enough that the darkness in that hall has not yet fully taken shape. Guest right hangs over all of it like a quiet spell. Bread and salt, a cup of wine, the old words that are supposed to make a room safe no matter how sharp the knives beneath the table. The way important words are spoken in Westeros carries a weight older than any crown, and at the twins, that weight is shattered. When the Freys break it in this timeline, the treachery is not clean. The victims fight back. Men who have tasted the salt rise from the benches with steel in their hands, and the story of that night spreads with an added sting. The Freys did not only murder guests, they nearly lost their own hall doing it. Arya crosses that threshold twice. Once as almost prey, pressed against a pillar, while music curdles into murder, and once as something else entirely, moving through the same corridors with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. She is both the girl, who might have died under a Frey banner, and the hand that answers the broken oath with fire in the kitchens and whispers in the dark. Is she avenging guest right, or learning how easily any word, even sacred ones, can be bent to purpose? Underneath runs the old question of fate. Was there always going to be a red wedding somewhere, some night, as long as Robb Stark broke his promise and Tywin Lannister sat in his tower counting costs? He does not leave much to chance. He speaks of order, of ending a war swiftly, of the way a man must sometimes use fear to keep the realm from tearing itself apart. Yet Arya's early arrival proves something he would never admit, that even the grandest design can be smudged at the edges by a single stubborn will. Robb lives long enough here to feel the full weight of being both boy and king, not frozen forever in that last bewildered moment. Catelyn is not only a mother howling over her son's corpse, but a woman who must sit in cold rooms and reckon with the price of every choice she pushed him toward. Arya, moving between them and the shadows, is forced to see herself as Stark and as killer, as someone who loves the faces at that high table and yet can slip away to do things they must never fully understand. The story of the twins in this version refuses to stay trapped in a single night. Its shadow stretches over years, raids and counter-raids, Frey sons dying on lonely roads, northern banners gathering again under a scarred but unbroken king. Each act of resistance traces back to that first crossing of the river, to the moment a girl arrived just early enough to twist the knife of history a few degrees off its old course. And somewhere beyond the neck, where other wars are waking and other oaths are being weighed, that slight twist begins to matter in ways no one at the twins can yet see. Because if one massacre can be blunted, if one set of plans can be bruised but not broken, what happens when the next great darkness comes looking for a world that has already learned to fight the future? What if that twist at the twins is only the first proof that the whole story is made of such narrow escapes and near failures? What if Arya's single, desperate arrival can turn a massacre into a battle, and a different small motion of the same girl's hand could erase the red wedding entirely, or drown it in a deeper kind of darkness? The river air is damp around the twins, the stones sweating in the night, and in one branch of the tale, Arya moves quickly enough to throw the room off its script. But step half a pace to the side. Imagine the hound's horse going lame a mile earlier. Imagine a Frey outrider seeing the glint of steel, the wrong face, the wrong girl at the wrong time. In that version, she does not reach the gate as a warning. She reaches it as prey. They bind her because Walder Frey is the kind of man who understands the cost of a name. A Stark in his cell is a word he can spend later. She sits in the dark beneath the hall, hands raw against the rope, listening as the music begins overhead. The way a man listens to his own sentence. She cannot see the crossbows raised, but she hears the first wrong notes, the first screams, the way important words are swallowed by steel. When the doors above finally open and the blood runs down the steps, it does not touch her. It changes her all the same. In that path, Arya Stark comes out of the twins colder than the river in winter, her understanding of mercy pared down to bone. The list she carries in her mouth becomes less a child's litany and more a map. She speaks of names as debts, of justice as something taken, not given. The girl who once chased cats in the Red Keep becomes the shadow that never learned there was any other way to live. Now turn the wheel the other way. What if the horse does not stumble? The guard does not look too closely, and Arya reaches Robb not in a rush of steel and song, but in the quiet before the feast. A small figure at the edge of the firelight, mud on her boots, a word on her tongue that will not wait. She drags him from the hall before the music changes, her urgency cutting through his pride with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. They leave, Catelyn at his side, a few sworn swords following, confusion rippling behind them. The doors close on an empty king's chair. Crossbows rise toward a space already abandoned. The Freys break guest right for nothing. Their treachery stands naked in the torchlight, but the blood they wanted most has already ridden into the night. Between these extremes, the bound witness and the escaped king, the canon we know begins to look strangely narrow. How much of what we call fate is only this? One horse that did not stumble, one guard who did not turn his head, one girl who reached the door a heartbeat too late. In the final reflection, we will gather these broken paths, not to choose a single correct history, but to ask why this wound at the twins continues to haunt the story, and what it shows us about the choices we pretend were never choices at all. So we close this gate by walking it again, step by step, the way a man might retrace his path across a winter field to understand where the ice first began to crack. In this timeline, the horse does not stumble, the guard does not turn his head, and Arya Stark reaches the twins an hour early. The kitchens are her first battlefield. Heat, steam, the sharp smell of onions and old fat, knives flashing in hands that do not yet know they are part of a war. She moves through that room like a shadow, listening, catching the wrong words in the wrong mouths, the way important words sometimes drift to those who are not meant to hear them. From there, the story bends. A girl in a servant's cloak finds her mother, finds her brother, forces her way into the circle of men and maps and wounded pride. She does not have proof. She has impressions, fragments of overheard talk, the feel of a trap closing. It should not be enough. It is, because Catelyn has learned to listen to the shape of fear in her children's voices, and Robb has learned, too late in one history, what it costs to ignore it. The slaughter becomes a battle. Crossbows still rise from the gallery, but steel is half drawn below. Wolves answer arrows with howls and northern steel, and the hall at the twins becomes a killing ground, claimed by no one and by everyone. Robb bleeds. Catelyn screams. Men die on both sides, and yet a fragment of the north tears itself free in the chaos. A king with a broken crown, a mother with torn hands, a sister who will not be pushed back outside the door this time. Years pass. The war does not end cleanly. The north never fully bows. It smoulders. Freys and Boltons hold lands but not hearts, ruling from rooms that feel more like siege towers than seats of power, always waiting for the knock in the dark. Vengeance comes not as a sudden storm but as a long winter, small raids, vanished riders, whispers of a girl with many names. Walder Frey dies at his own table, not by a stranger's hand, but by the same small Stark who once ran through his kitchens. What does this path reveal about her? That Arya's truest gift has never been the blade in her hand, but the way she sees danger in the corners, others leave in shadow. That when given the choice between running and standing beside her blood, She moves toward the fire, not away from it. She becomes in this telling both knife and conscience, the sharp edge that cuts, and the quiet voice that will not let her family pretend they are safe when they are not. And yet, even here, the cost remains. Men still die on the twins' stone floors. The war still grinds bone to dust. Arya saves lives and spends her childhood to pay for them, piece by careful piece, with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. He does not drop it, he sets it down, knowing it may still break. So the last image is not a victory. It is a girl walking away from the twins after Walder's final breath, boots sticky with old blood, the towers shrinking behind her. She does not look back often. She does not need to. She carries the twins with her now, the darkness and the narrow escape, the knowledge that this time she was not only a witness to her family's doom, but the small, fierce hand that pushed the door open before it closed forever. She walks away from the twins, but the twins do not walk away from her. The road is quiet, the horse's breath a thin, white ghost in the cooling air, and somewhere behind her men are still shouting, still dying, still learning what it means when a guest breaks bread and then breaks faith. All of it, in this telling, hangs on something that small. One horse, not lame but sound. One road, chosen in impatience rather than caution. One hard, muttered decision from the hound to press on instead of making camp. Change that, and Arya Stark is no longer the girl who arrived to see her brother's body desecrated at a distance. She is the girl who slipped through a side door, tasted the wrongness in the room before the music changed, and put her small, fierce hand on the night itself. What if it had been otherwise? What if the horse had stumbled again? Or Sandor had decided that no lord was worth riding in the dark? The way a man turns his reins can decide whether a king dies in a hall of false laughter or walks out under his own power. The way important words are spoken or swallowed, ride on, we wait, becomes the thin line between a massacre and a maimed but living army. Thinking through that thin line does something to our understanding of the story we know. It throws a different light on Ned's honour, on Robb's vows, on Catelyn's wary eye for insult and betrayal. We see how fragile each moment was, how a single letter, a single promise kept or broken, could have shifted the whole war. When we watch Arya survive in canon, always just missing, always just too late, the survival itself takes on a sharper edge. She does not drift through a fixed fate. She moves through a web of almosts and nearlies, any one of which might have broken her. There is a quieter recognition here as well, one that does not belong only to kings and wolves. The viewer knows, in some private room of the heart, the way a different street walked one winter evening, a phone call made or left for tomorrow, a word of apology spoken or held back, can cast a long shadow across years. What if the single decision that seemed so small becomes the hinge upon which everything else turns? And what if we only see the hinge when the door has already swung shut? This version of the twins offers more resistance, more life, clinging stubbornly to the fire. Robb rides away. Catelyn breathes. Walder Frey pays a cost he never imagined. Yet there is a bitter sweetness threaded through it, because Arya's escape from helpless witness does not grant her peace. It grants her more years of war, more names, more nights when she stares into the darkness and feels the weight of the choices she made with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table, only to watch it crack. He speaks of miracles sometimes, the wandering septon who shares their fire for a night, and mutters that the gods sent a wolf girl to punish oath-breakers. Arya listens, and she does not answer. She knows there were no clean miracles at the twins, only different wounds. So we come back, again and again, to that gate, to Arya on the saddle, the towers rising ahead, the air thick with the smell of rain and blood not yet spilled, arriving just in time, or just too late. The whole shape of the north, of the war, of Arya herself, balanced on that razor-thin difference. And somewhere beyond this road, beyond this night, There is one more choice waiting for her, one that will make the twins feel for the first time almost simple. The rain comes first in most of these imaginings. The smell of wet stone, of horse and leather, of torches fighting against a gathering darkness that is not only the sky. At a certain point, every version of this story narrows to a single thing. A girl at a gate, her hand on cold stone, and the understanding that whatever she does next will cost her something she cannot yet name. What if, in your telling, she turns left instead of right once she is inside? What if she slips not toward the hall but toward the kitchens or the Frey barracks or the stables where banners are furled in the shadows? You might see her save Robb and lose Catelyn, or drag Catelyn to safety while the young wolf falls beneath a dozen blades. You might let Grey Wind live and watch the way a man like Roose Bolton recalculates in the face of a dire wolf's fire-bright eyes. You can follow her steps into smaller, quieter rooms. Perhaps she reaches the musicians before they set down their lutes and take up crossbows. Perhaps she reaches Walder Frey's high table and says her name aloud, the way important words sometimes break a spell not through power but through simple, undeniable truth. Or perhaps she fails, and in failing alters only herself, hardening faster, sharpening sooner, becoming something colder than the girl who rode to the twins in canon. From there, the paths multiply. If Robb lives, does the north still burn? If Catelyn survives, does she become a different kind of shadow than Lady Stoneheart? Or does the river still claim her, only later, in some other darkened room? You can send Arya south with a living king, or back to the Riverlands with a longer list, or north toward a wall that has not yet felt the full weight of winter. And beyond Arya, there are other gates you might stand before. Jon at the wall, pausing one heartbeat longer before he speaks his vows. Sansa at her first marriage, choosing one word differently at the sept. Tyrion in his trial, deciding whether he will demand combat or accept the cost of silence. What if each of these small divergences becomes its own red wedding, its own hinge upon which the whole story turns? He does not say it aloud, but every reader, every watcher knows this instinctively. To imagine these branches is to stay in quiet conversation with a world you are not ready to leave. You speak of them in comments, in late-night talks. In stories you tell with the particular care of a man placing something fragile on a table. In doing so, you keep these characters moving, breathing, choosing. Because beneath every feast and battle in Westeros lies a handful of ordinary-seeming choices, no more grand in the moment than the ones that shape our own days. We almost never know which small decision will become our red wedding gate, which word spoken or withheld will echo for years. So you can leave Arya here, if you like, at the threshold. Her fingers rest on the stone, the torches hiss. Somewhere inside, the first notes of the song are beginning. In one version, she is too late. In another, she is just on time. And somewhere between those two, in the narrow space where stories breathe, she is still deciding whether to step through.